All right, it's 7 o'clock. I'd like to call the board business meeting to order. May I have roll call, please, Michelle?
Anderson,
Here.
Delgado,
Present.
Jacobs, Jacobs,
Here.
Larson,
Present.
Levy,
Here.
Miller,
Present.
Wong.
Here.
All members are present with Miller, Larson, Wong, and Anderson in the boardroom, and Jacobs, Delgado, and Levy virtual.
May I have approval of the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Are there any questions or discussion over the agenda? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the agenda is approved, which brings us to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and that brings our first agenda item, our announcements. All right, and Board Member Levy has the announcements tonight.
One minute. I am looking at the email. Okay. This morning was the kickoff to the start of the school year with our convocation guest speaker, Tim Murray. His message was staying personal and authentic in the midst of adversity. Although his message was virtual through Zoom, he was very engaging for staff. Our last grab-and-go meal distribution was on Monday, August 24th. We will be providing 5 lunch and 5 breakfast meals on that day. Please stop by any of our elementary schools or Beloit Memorial High School from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. to receive these meals. We will restart our meal distribution program on Tuesday, September 8th. We continue to populate our social media pages with positive messaging and updates on districts through Motivation Monday, highlighting our students, principal highlights on Tuesday and Thursday, and district families sharing what they love about the school district of Beloit on Family Friday. Congratulations to 3 of our Beloit Memorial High School graduates, Nettie Chauville, J.C. Walker, and Hannah Wolf. They recently were awarded $500 scholarships from the Beloit Evening Lions Club. Congratulations to BMHS student athlete junior Griffin Obernader. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Sophomore Kai Wong and sophomore Connor Churchill. These 3 boys competed in the Beloit Men's City Golf Tournament. In his second year competing, Griffith placed 8th in the championship flight. In his third time competing, Kai Wong on the B flight. And in his first year competing, Connor placed in the top 15 of A flight. Dr. Kieser will be hosting 3 webinars on September 2nd and 4th. These webinars are for families in our district to connect with Dr. Kieser before the start of the school year. While we will be presenting information, there will also be an opportunity for questions. All 3 webinars will provide the same information in the same format, so families are encouraged to select the date and time that is most convenient for them. A link to registration was sent to families through voice, email, text, and SDB app last week. The link will also be shared again in Dr. Kieser's weekly update on Sunday afternoon. In the past 2 days, 99 families have registered. School begins on September 8th. There is still time to enroll and register. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact the district, either going to the Safe to Learn portion of the website or calling 608-361-4000. Thank you and have a great night.
Thank you very much, Board Member Levy. That brings us to recognitions.
Can you hear me now? Oh, there we go. All right. Good evening. Good to see, I would say smiling faces, but how about bright eyes? I'm happy for tonight to share a little bit with you. The 2020 census totals help determine the amount of funding that state governments and local communities receive from the federal government for the next decade. Census Bureau data is used to distribute federal funds to state and local communities for health, education, housing, and infrastructure programs. With education, it directly affects special education grants to states, the National School Lunch Program, Head Start, and much more. We have been working very closely with Mr. Jerry Huffman, Wisconsin Partnership Specialist, Chicago region of the U.S. Census Bureau. We've worked with social media messaging. All of our school marquees have shared the census website. We included information in our weekly family newsletters and participated in the city's census committee meetings. Jerry's been a real positive driving force as he wants to make sure that we receive the most from the funding that is allocated and determined through the census. So Jerry was also able to secure and make some really nice donations to our district as well. It included 3,500 folders, lots and lots of water bottles, drawstring backpacks, and chip clips for our students. These items were handed out to our students during our grab-and-go meals, and we're here today to thank him for his collaboration with us and the donation to our students. As we know, folders and drawstring backpacks are a much-needed item for our students. So I'm sure our families appreciated the chip clips too. So Jerry, if you'd like to come up and say a few words, and I'll put the mic right there for you.
I forgot how good it feels to take a mask off. Monica left out only one thing. I graduated down the street in 1974. So it's pretty emotional being back here. And I've been regaling my wife with stories all afternoon. I played tennis over there. I did this, I did that. I tried to hit golf balls across the river. That didn't work out real well. Do any of you remember Don Sudkamp, the principal in the 70s when I was a student here? I spent a lot of time in Mr. Sudkamp's office, and we had great conversations. They used to go something like, Jerry, 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 and I'd just stare at my shoes and go, yeah. And he'd go, Jerry, Jerry, Jerry. Just all these wonderful memories have kept coming back. I wanted to touch on the report card for Beloit and how you're doing so far this year. Overall, you're doing well. The national response rate for the survey right now is about 64.5%, which isn't too bad. The Wisconsin rate is 70.8%. So Rock County's beating the national average. Guess who's kicking everybody else's butt? Beloit, 75.6%. That's really good. That's really good. Janesville is at 78.2%. So Beloit's right in there in the competition. And to give you an idea of how sometimes even the smallest towns can make some things happen, the two top cities in Rock County right now are Milton with 81.6%, and Edgerton just cracked 80% today. Rock County gets it. And I can't stress enough the issue of money. For every person you count, you're eligible to receive more federal funding. For every person that's down from the population of 10 years ago, you're going to lose money. So it really matters, folks. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the president The president has decided he's going to end the census a month early, which, from being in the trenches, if he called and asked my opinion, I'd love to tell him, to be perfectly candid. But we're doing the best we can to keep it moving. I've been working with Monica on some media things for you folks. I have an obviously horrible bias towards Beloit, so forgive me. Whatever we can do to keep pushing it. A couple more numbers that matter. The population number for Beloit right now is about 37,000. And bear in mind, I wasn't a math major in college either. And just about 26,000 people have answered the survey. We've got just over a month to go. You need to get a lot more answers. Anytime you can stress, hey, did you do your survey? Can I help you with it? It's not hard, come on. Talk to people, because the way we've done this across the state right now, and especially across my 5 counties, they're my personal counties now, is one-to-one communication and appealing to people. You're at 68.1% right now, and to be honest, I couldn't find the number from 10 years ago, but assuming you're about in the average of what was common then, you would be somewhere in that 72, 75% range. You have time to make it. Editorials, doctor, media, anybody you can talk to, because in a report I had to write today for Congress, they asked what my personal philosophy was. I said, if I could get at least 3 people, I'd talk to them. And it really is one-to-one. Right now, to get to that 80% number, you need about 4,000 people to at least protect what you've been getting in the last 10 years. And the quirky factor with census is, it's not a budget for 1 year, it's a budget for 10 years. And you don't get a chance to change it, no matter what happens between now and the next 10 years. It's been a tough year. It really has. There's a lot of things that are out of our control. This is the one thing you can control. Every form that gets filled out, and if you do it online, the average is about 7 to 8 minutes. That's more money in the bank. Every form. And I know 4,000 people sounds like a lot, but it's not as much as 11,000 people if you wanted to shoot for 100%. Talk to people. Send postcards. WCLO radio is always looking for interviews, and between Monica and I, we can help you get that set up easily. But get out there and please, please, please talk to people. If you've got any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them. John. And I went to high school with his sister.
Yes, he came up and introduced himself. And what a great period of time in our school's history, too. Some great sports teams back then. So, in fact, I think some of the, you guys won the state championship.
Tony Brizzolera pitched for the Braves for a while.
Yeah.
Gary Hubka, I think, signed with the Rangers.
Yeah.
And I got my brains beat out on those tennis courts every night for a long time.
A question I have is
Yes, sir.
If we want to help people to register, what's the process or the easiest way to go about doing that? And I was just kind of thinking, I think I filled mine out. I don't know if I did or not. How can I go about double checking to make sure I did mine?
Go online, 2020census.gov. You don't need an invitation. You don't need anything anymore. It's really point and click. If you've already filled out yours, it will bounce back. But if you can talk to Ann, talk to your neighbors, talk to anybody, and get them to fill it out. The library has been great about helping people. And I'm sorry, I don't have the phone numbers committed to memory, but if you look up Census 2020, you can call in and do it by phone. Forgive me. Some of the older folks, you say computers and they don't like it. But there's 2 different 800, there's actually 12 different 800 numbers, but you can do it easily in Spanish or English. And it's just a couple of minutes. It really is. Did I answer your question, John?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I just want to thank you so much for that update. And I'm just curious if you've encountered any barriers that are unusual due to COVID in terms of reaching out to folks one-on-one. And if so, if you could describe the best way in which you've been able to reach out so we on the board and our viewers can help participate as well.
People are scared of other people right now. And the only thing worse than wearing a mask and trying to strike up a conversation is saying, I'm with the government, I'm here to help. You approach people you know. This young lady, right, I would say, excuse me, miss, have you done your census form yet? And she would say, yes, I have. I go, well, great. Miss, have you done yours? No, I haven't. Can I help you with yours? We have teams right now working across the state, I'm trying to remember the acronym for it, of where if you want to set up an event and invite those 11,000 people to come down here on a Saturday morning, we can make them line up.
We can do it virtually.
You can do it virtually. We will staff events with our people who will do it for them right on the spot. And again, forgive me, I can't remember the exact number, but we have dozens of languages and people who can help in almost any language you can imagine. So that would be the easiest way, Megan. Just approach them. 2020census.gov, point and click. It will happen, and you're done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, Maria, did you have a question? Oh, yep, go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if there was any special outreach for our Spanish speaker community. And then also if he could explain just a little that this is not provided to immigration or anything like that, because I think that there's a lot of fear.
Great point.
When
Great
it comes
point.
to
Thank you for reminding me about that.
census information. So just for the audience that we have out there that is listening,
Thank you for that,
Hispanic,
Maria.
maybe that would be a good information to provide.
One of the things census does not do well is share information. When it comes to us, and I'm being totally serious, it's treated as sacred information. There are no questions about citizenship, immigration status, anything else. We do not share information. One of the things I had to do when I signed on with the team, I had to sign an affidavit that said I could be liable up to 5 years in prison, and I think it's a $500,000 fine if I would reveal this young lady's name and address or anything else. And there was something else, Maria, but I forget the first part of your question.
If there's any outreach being done to reach our Hispanic community.
Yes, Lori.
Who's in our committee?
Okay.
City, we're working with the city on
Could you hear that?
it. Oh, I can share that.
Please.
I'm sorry, I did not.
Okay. Yes, the school district is working with the city, and we sit on a census committee group that is working with individuals in that target market. We also participated in some videos that they did. I think Tulio from the school district and Maria participated in those video messaging that we shared out in Spanish on social media as well as the city. So there has been outreach. And again, this went out in our family newsletters to all of our families, those weekly newsletters with information as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for everything that you're doing with the census work and as well as donating the supplies to our students. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'd love to show this to Mr. Sedkamp. Thank you very much, folks.
All right, we are now at public comment. I know we do have one person waiting to speak. Citizens are welcome to attend all open meetings of the Board of Education. Robert's Rules of Order will be followed at all times. Persons attending board meetings are expected to conduct themselves in a respectful and courteous manner that models appropriate behavior for our students. Persons wishing to comment are expected to comply with the following norms in order to maintain a respectful and ordered meeting and to protect all persons, including members of the public, district employees, and district students from personal attacks or discussion of confidential matters in a public forum. Comments should be directed to members of the Board of Education and not district employees, students, or other members of the public in attendance at the meeting. Comments that attack any individual personally or professionally or are derogatory or demean others will not be tolerated. Personnel matters or concerns regarding specific district personnel are not appropriate topics to be addressed during an open meeting and should be handled in accordance with district policy and procedures. Concerns or questions regarding students will not be allowed. Comments regarding another individual's membership in a legally protected class, i.e. race, sexual orientation, religion, etc., is strictly prohibited. Response from the board will be limited to clarifying inaccurate information, seeking additional information from the citizen, or acknowledging that the citizen has been understood. The board will not debate with the citizen, and the board may not take action on an item raised during public comment that is not on the meeting notice or agenda. The chair will interrupt and rule a citizen who violates any of these norms out of order. If ruled out of order by the chair, the person's opportunity to address the board will end immediately and the microphone will be turned off. A citizen who violates these norms may be restricted from making public comments at future meetings. Thank you for your participation and courtesy.
President Larson, Dr.
Yes.
Keyser, members of the board. I'm revisiting you from a few months ago.
Can you state your name and address?
Oh, my name is James Reesberg. I live at 2795 Fuller Drive here in Beloit,
Thank you.
and I'm the principal founder of an emergency management consulting firm called Emergency Planning Solutions, LLC. I was here a few months ago to talk to you about the emergency plan document and the emergency management process. And on August 12th and 13th, there was about 40 members of Dr. Keyser's staff, principals, vice principals, staff here in the school district, who we went through about 16 hours of training, including 2 functional exercises with them. And what we talked about and what we spent a lot of time on is the National Response Framework, which was put out after 9/11, after the World Trade Center, and it talked about the National Incident Management System. And so we went through all of that. We also talked about the functions of the Incident Command System. We talked about the functions of emergency management and the functions of an Emergency Operations Center. With that, we had 2 exercises. We had exercise the first day and we had a doozy on the second day. The first one was a tabletop exercise just to get people in the room comfortable with working in an emergency operations center because it's extremely stressful, but there are certain ways and certain things that they need to do, and one of those is to stay in their lanes. They have a function to do, and we never want micromanagers in the emergency operations center. I've done this since 1991. I'm still an adjunct faculty member for the National Emergency Training Center in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and for the Department of Homeland Security. And over that time, I have had the great opportunity to instruct about 30,000 public officials in the art of emergency management. So on the first exercise that the group went through, it just so happened that we had a major thunderstorm going through town, and Hackett Elementary School was hit by lightning, which started the school on fire. So they had to manage that. They had to manage how to evacuate, where their evacuation locations in their plan document are designated where they will go. Their logistics officials in the EOC had to figure out how many buses they need and where they were going to take the students to get them away from the emergency. And then they also had to, based on the plan document, is find out in the document where their reunification with family members would occur and what that process has in place. Who can come and pick up those children after an emergency? Do they have to show identification? Are they on the list that they can take the children out of there? Because the whole premise of this is keeping everybody in the district safe. The second day, They had a functional tabletop exercise where myself and other members of the
Excuse me,
district.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we're hit our 3 minutes there. Do you want to take a moment and wrap up? I'm sorry, it's a 3-minute per speaker.
That was the fastest 3 minutes I've
It
ever spent in my
was,
life.
wasn't it?
It was.
And I'm really enthralled by what you're saying too.
So let me tell you very briefly, and I will finish briefly,
Okay.
is the people in this district that have been trained in emergency management are very good. Some of the best that my partners and I have seen, especially in a K-12 school district. Dr. Keyser was the first one in over 400 of these exercises that I've conducted that would not come out of lockdown when I told him he could. Because he said to me, because I was playing the police chief at the time, is that he's not coming out of lockdown until the whole process is set to get students out of the high school and to get them to places where the reunification site is in order to do it safely. So I commend the whole staff. I tell you, you have some wonderful people, very dedicated people that volunteer to do this. That in the event of emergency in this district, I will tell you that this team, Dr. Keyser and his team, are fully prepared to handle that. Any questions? Or comments? And John told me I had to be brief.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't see any questions. John, do you have one?
Yeah. Jim, thanks for taking the administrative team and staff through this. It's very important. I think that it's one of those things that you had been talking about it. I think you've called me a couple of times in the last couple of years about getting this going. So I appreciate your persistence on that. And also, it's great to see good to hear the comments about the preparedness of our staff and administrative team. I think hopefully that helps all families out there, if they're listening, to appreciate and know that their kids are probably a little safer here than they would be if obviously we didn't go through these practices.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
I just want to say that it was really good learning. It's something we hope we never have to do, but the fact that we've gone through it, I feel more confident, and it has showed how well this staff has been trained. So it was very good training. Thank you for providing that to us for so long.
Thank you. Thank you for being a part of your team.
Board Member Jacobs?
Just very quickly, I actually had the experience of the 2-day training when I was still working, and it is outstanding. It's very intense, but I think that our school district, having had that training, is by far one of the best. Jim's training is phenomenal, and I feel totally secure that our buildings are safe and that the staff are on top of everything. So thanks, Jim, and thanks, Dr. Keyser.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Raceberg, again. Okay. Brings us to the next agenda item, the third-party exit interview data and trends. And so we have Tracy Shirk from Shirk Consulting.
Which one is it?
It's not in there. It's in a PowerPoint. It's in a PowerPoint.
Good evening. Thanks so much for the invite back and the conversation regarding the exit interviews. And so what we are here to report out on tonight, is the exit interviews from 2019 to 2020. And we'll be looking at some of that specific data. And so what our goals for tonight is to review some of the national data for exit surveys for school districts. Then we'll look at the survey results and insights. We're looking specifically at some key areas. Those key areas are what impact does length of stay have on the turnover in the district? And we're also specifically looking at the differences between the different schools. We will be doing a comparison to the climate surveys. So we have now done 2 climate surveys. We did a winter climate survey and a spring climate survey. So what are those trends between those 2 surveys and then the 2 exit surveys that we have done? And then we will close tonight with what are those specific opportunities for action. So let's first take a look at the national data. And when we look at the national data, there were some key trends that came out with that. We had a lag, sorry about that. There were some key trends that came out within that data. And those key trends for the national data are organizational policies and practices, teacher preparation and support, and school leadership. So when we look specifically at those 3 areas and those key trends, what we're seeing with organizational policies and practices from a national level is that compensation has a key impact on individuals leaving the districts. But one of the things that I wanted to really talk about with that, so here's what the data shows from the national level, and this was from a study by Gray and Ty in 2015, and that's that compensation was the 3rd highest driver to turnover, and teachers whose first year salary were less than $40,000 had an attrition rate of 10% higher than those who earned more in their first year. Here's some good news about what Beloit has done. Teacher salaries start at $43,000 annually, and with a master's degree, $49,000 annually. So one of the key things that we did, and when I worked with Tanya and Joanne and the HR team to really look at this as we got into the data, is, hey, what are those national trends, and then what are we seeing in the district? So I just wanted to name that first because that's an easy one, right? We will revisit compensation in a little bit. The second one was teacher preparation and support. So with that, the research showed that those staff who entered teaching through an alternative certification program were 25% more likely to leave their schools than full-time teachers who entered through a regular certification program. So that was a key driver. The reason why I bring this up here is one of the key concerns that we saw in the climate surveys was a concern about emergency licenses, right? So we know that those individuals that come in with emergency license have a higher turnover rate. The third thing that we specifically saw from the national data was school leadership. So this is of staff that left those teaching professions, 33% stated that it was due to concerns with school administration. 29% stated that they left due to lack of influence of school decision making. And then when looking at the key areas of dissatisfaction, 18% stated that their dissatisfaction was a result of too many intrusions on teaching time. So these are all things that we've heard here in the district in the past, correct? So we'll circle back around once we look at our numbers from this survey. I also want to look at the Wisconsin data. So what does the Wisconsin data tell us? And that tells us that length of stay has a specific impact on turnover. So those that left within the first 3 years, turnover was at a 19% rate. Those that left within 5 to 10 years, it was a 24% turnover rate. And those that left between 10 and 15 years, it was a 20% turnover rate. So we're going to see how that compares to what we've done here. And the good news is we're pretty close to that. Some of the other things that I wanted to share is when we look at turnover, I would be remiss not to mention the teacher shortage that we're currently experiencing. So one of the things that we know is that from the 2008 to 2009 school year to the 2015-2016 school year, there was a 15.4% drop in the number of education degrees awarded and a 27.4% drop in the number of people who completed a teacher preparation program. So we just talked about the impact of hiring individuals in with an emergency license. So why are we doing that? It's because we have a teacher shortage, which has us look then at we've got to retain the staff that we have, okay? The other thing that I wanted to name, I've been getting the question a lot in the last time that we presented this was, Tracy, what's the turnover percentage on a national average? And what the data is showing us is that it's 8% on a national average. However, I want to qualify that, okay? So the highest turnover that we're seeing in any state is 24%. Wisconsin falls in at number 13 out of all 50 states. The Learning Policy Institute found that the average turnover in Midwest cities was 16.4%. So in Midwest cities, we're at 16.4%. Now, one of the complicating factors here that the National Policy Institute research found is that those teaching in schools with 25% more students of color were more likely to have teachers leave than schools with fewer students of color. So, we clearly have that within the Beloit district, correct? And with that, the other thing to take a look at is when we look at our staff of color, do our staff of color leave at a higher rate than our staff that are not of color? The answer to that is yes. And what the national survey found is that Black teachers left at a rate of 21.8% compared to 15.8% of teachers overall. So I wanted to share that just to kind of lay the groundwork as we start to talk about our specific data. Are there any questions before I move on from there? Megan?
Thank you. I apologize if you're going to get to this. I didn't see it though when I looked it over. Do you have any information for what trends show for the impact of Grow Your Own programs on teacher retention for teachers overall?
So there were significant information on Grow Your Own. I will name, I didn't dig 100% into that, but I can definitely forward some information on Grow Your Own. And Grow Your Own is actually one of the things that I'm going to talk about because it's one of those key ways that we can start to look at how do we keep the great leaders and young professionals within our district and within our communities. And it is definitely one of the responses and solutions to the issue.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions from anyone at home.
Great.
Thank you.
So the next thing I'm going to just look at before we jump into our data is the school district of Beloit requested that we focused on 4 key buckets. Those buckets were engagement, climate, culture, and faith and process. So when we look at those buckets, I wanted to make sure that we tied together what the national data was to what the buckets we're looking at within the district. So as a reminder to what those key items are and what those key things mean, is engagement is the level that an employee is fully absorbed by the enthusiastic about their work, taking on a positive action to further the school's reputation and success. One of the things I want to name is what are the 4 drivers of disengagement? They're not in the right role. It is that the manager isn't a right fit for leading them and inspiring them in their position. And manager has a huge impact on this. The next is the team. Do they feel like they're with a team that they can really thrive with and that fulfills kind of that strategy for that group? The 4th is culture, and I'm going to talk about culture in a bit of a different perspective here in a minute. The second bucket that we were asked to look at was climate, and we define climate as the school's effect on students, including teaching practices, diversity, and the relationship among administrators, teachers, parents, and students. So within this bucket, we see the teacher preparation and support, which we just talked about, and we'll tie that in just a second. The 3rd is culture, and that's really school leadership. So that's looking at the way teachers and other staff members work together and set beliefs, values, and assumptions that they share. And so again, the bucket from the national perspective is school leadership. And then the 4th is faith and process. These are our organizational policies and practices. And that's defined as the level of trust and understanding that staff have in district administration and the board to do what they say they will do while following and holding themselves and others accountable. One of the key things that came out in this area, we've talked a lot about it the last 3 conversations, is student discipline. And so we'll continue that conversation once we get into the data. So let's take a look at the data. Our turnover comparison, so our 2018 to 2019 total turnover for the district was 16%. Our 2019-2020 turnover is 17%. So we did see an increase in that. And with that increase, we had some specifics when we looked at that. So we're looking at the number of retirees in that, and then we are also specifically looking at the number of non-renewals. And so what we saw this year is that the retirees were 22 this year and the non-renewals were 21. So I want to kind of name that because that does definitely increase that number. So here's the turnover data comparisons. So we're seeing the difference between the 2018-2019 school year had a total turnover of 135, or the 16%, and then the 2019-2020 school year had a total turnover of 17%, or 144 staff. And we can see what the turnover numbers are specifically by school. What I did here is, we're not caught up, hang on. Sorry, I didn't realize my slide was not caught up with what you're seeing at home. There we go. Okay. It's helpful to be looking at the correct thing, right? So as I said, the total turnover in 2018 was 135, or 16%. Total turnover in 2019-2020 was 144, or 17%. And we can see the schools that had a higher turnover from the previous year. And those are highlighted in red. So let's take a look at the results. The response rate we had this year was 35%. So we had 42 respondents out of 121. You're going to notice that's a different number than 144. The reason being is the non-renewals were actually sent after the time that the data was done. So I do just want to name that because I don't want that to be confused, and I know that those non-renewals come a little bit later. John, you had a question.
Yes, is the 35%, what's good, bad? I mean, is that?
Yeah. So this is the slide showing that. So when we look at, that didn't answer your question, John. So you're saying, hey, is 35% a good number based on exit data? Yeah, that is a good number. Remember when we looked at climate data, we were looking at a minimum of 60% because those are our current staff. These are staff that have already left the district.
Thank you.
Okay, and our HR director, Ms. Williams, has a question also.
Thank you. So maybe not a question, but I just want to provide some clarification around the definition of non-renewal. So a non-renewal, what we use that for is like somebody that may have had a 1-year contract and they may have not reapplied for a position, or they may have, what do I want to say? They have not reapplied or just not renewed. So, that number looks a little high. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that HR was not driving those decisions in terms of a non-renewal based on performance or behavior.
Thank you. And I do have a question before I go a little bit too much farther, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the climate surveys we saw in the beginning of the year versus what we saw in the springtime were drastically different. And so I'm wondering how many of the resignations were like from mid-year? So does that come out somewhere, or?
I don't have that in this deck, so I'm going from memory here, and I can provide you those numbers of which were the ones that came essentially effective June 10th versus which were the ones that came mid-year, because we knew that there were a number of individuals that left mid-year for some of the administrative concerns at that time. And those responses were also very different, right? So what we're seeing here is we're seeing a compilation of the whole year versus if we were to break that out, we would see different responses based on that. Okay. So Kyle, I can definitely follow up with you on that. I don't have that built in for the presentation tonight.
Thank you. And Stephanie does have a question before we go on. Board Member
Tracy.
Jacob.
Hey, yeah, Kyle brings up a really interesting point, and I guess I don't know if it's possible because some of these look a little alarming, But, you know, when Tanya made the comment about the non-renewals and then Kyle's comment, I would be very curious to see if you took the non-renewals out, you took the mid-year resignations out, I would be very curious to see what those numbers look like. I think they, for me anyway, it'd be a little bit more reflective of, to me personally, it would just be a little bit more a real feel of what's going on with behind it. I just, if it's possible, I'd like to see that.
I'm okay. Yeah, thank you. So I want to make sure that I understand your question so that I can follow up appropriately. And what I hear your question being is, what is the turnover numbers if we were to pull out anything that happened mid-year? So I'm hearing you say, I just want to know the individuals that essentially terminated effective June 10th. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you know, because, and yes, and did you say you'd take out the non-renewals as well? Because I'm familiar with that, you know, oftentimes with those, as Tanya had said, some people are just on a year contract. So I guess what I'm looking at is to really see the meat of who's been in the district, who intended on staying for a period of time, and they left.
Okay, and what we're going to show in just a minute is we're going to show the year over year so that we can have that full year compiled, because even those that left mid-year left for a reason, and we can see what are those specific reasons that they left. So Kyle, you and I can follow up afterwards to, perfect. Any other questions?
Yeah, Ms. Armstrong has a question.
Again, much like Tanya, it isn't so much a question, but informational side is that, you know, when the district presents its diversity report in the fall, they will also provide the separation data, and we, you know, typically can break that out. And, you know, much like we're reporting our financials and things, we can always be, this data is just reflective of who's answering that exit survey. We can definitely provide some of those resources of what we're seeing in turnover monthly or, you know, quarterly, however we would like to do that. But it is going to be subjective of the whole district so that we can see that retention turnover number. We want to be sure that we're saying this is just the percentage of who completed that survey. So if we're looking at timelines, HR can definitely provide those statistics and data points of when you are looking at turnover timeframes. With everything that has happened in the past year, I think that will give some context as well as we look at these turnover numbers. But just to be cognizant of, these are the numbers of what we had with participating in that survey. So I just wanted to clarify that part of it.
Thanks, Joanne. And the data that we're getting comes from your HR department, Joanne, anyway. So that's the data that we're getting as far as their turnover numbers. That's coming from there. And then we're using that really to take a look at how does this break down from the survey data that we receive.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
And it looks like that's all the questions for now.
Okay. So let's take a look at the exit interviews that we've done. And when I say strengths and exit interviews, I wanted to look at, you know, yes, these individuals still left, but as they're rating things, what they're rating is communication with coworkers was open, immediate supervisor treats me fairly at the building level. So those were kind of the two highest scores that we see. Again, that falls in that team bucket that we talked about earlier. Here's the opportunities that we have. And one of the things I want to name is when you see the line crossed out, so the darker blue versus the lighter blue, that's last year's exit survey versus this year's. So you can see how these are changing, okay? The other thing that I want to name is how we specifically asked these questions. So for example, staff were asked, based on your experience with the school district of Beloit, please rate the importance of each of these items on your decision to leave, okay? So the higher score for the first 3 under opportunities is actually negative and the lower score is positive. I just don't want anyone being confused with which way we're going on that rating scale. And then the last one, employee concerns are addressed effectively. That was saying, based on your experience with the school district of Beloit, please rate the following statements, where 5 being high there. So I just want to make sure that that doesn't get confusing. Otherwise, it's going to throw off some of the questions and how we're naming this as we move forward. Amy, it looked like you had a question.
Mm-hmm. Oh, just a comment. The slides are not syncing up for the viewers at home.
The presentation is also uploaded onto Board Docs if you,
there we go.
if there's a little bit of a lag.
Nope,
No, I have it, but if there's someone at home who's watching it that doesn't have access for whatever reason, that would be helpful.
Thank you. And Board Member Jacob.
Hey again, Tracy, and perhaps you mentioned it and I missed it. When you say staff, is that only teachers or is that paras, teachers, etc.?
Yeah, it's everyone. So when we looked at these, we're looking at everyone. We do have, the teachers broken out. And in this survey, we had, from those that actually did the phone survey, there was very few other than teachers in this group. So just kind of note that as we looked at that data, I don't know why.
Thank you, Tracy.
Okay, we got it. Gotta love it when technology works and when it doesn't work, right? All right, so with those opportunities, again, the dark blue with a line through it, that's what we saw from the 2018-19 survey versus the 2019-20 surveys, the lighter blue. So as we look at that, let's break each of these down because there's some, great data here as to, all right, these were the key reasons why staff are leaving. So let's dig into each of those one by one. And then once we do this overall, we're going to take a look at it by length of stay, then we'll take a look at it by school. Okay? So by the opportunity, what we know is that exiting staff, and we're looking at support from district administration, okay? So why are individuals leaving? They feel they're not being supported. The key reasons here are specifically relating to discipline and so when I say discipline, it means, hey, I have a student that threw a chair in a classroom and I moved and I sent them, to administration, they're back in my classroom that same day. Or some of the other examples that came out were, there was a specific issue where a parent called and then I made a decision as a teacher within my classroom and the principal overrode that decision without having a conversation with me first. So not feeling supported by administration to truly teach in their classroom. So that was a key point. The other key point that was made there is, what are the resources for the interventions so that we can teach within the classroom? So the mental health resources, the social service resources, so that we can address those issues before they become behavior and discipline issues. So again, the supports needed to meet students where they are in order to meet grade level milestones for all students. So that was definitely another concern is, how do we ensure that they're meeting grade level when we get them into our classroom when they're below grade level? So what are those remediation things that we need to do? And then also, how does that tie to my rating as a teacher so that I can feel successful in the classroom and know that I'm making a difference to bring these kids up to where they need to be? So the support with that. And some of this is mentoring. And so some of this is training. And you'll see this is kind of a theme that comes throughout. Especially when we talk about how we break it down between length of stay. So some of the staff sentiments that we heard were, I did not feel my supervisor would support my decision in the classroom to best serve students, thus did not feel I could be an effective educator, and that's why I left. And when we look at this data compared to what we just heard for the national data, we're definitely seeing a trend with this. Also, 50% of respondents that we talked to in phone interviews mentioned support and mentoring from their immediate supervisor as a seasoned professional. So saying, hey, you know, I need some support from my supervisor, my principal, whoever that is, on a day-to-day basis as things are happening versus only during the formal process that may or may not happen on an annual basis depending upon what cycle that they're in. Are there any other questions on that one before I move on to the next one? Okay. So with organizational policies and practices, this one was really looking at two key items came up with organizational policies and practices. The first item that came up with that was salary, and we're going to talk about what that is when we talk about length of stay, but that was something that came up. The second thing that came up for organizational policies and practices was hiring and equity in the hiring practice. And then the third thing that came up, sorry, I split out compensation and hiring practices into two buckets. The third thing that came up there was discipline. In ensuring that there's consistent discipline and fair discipline so that one group of students isn't disciplined in one way and yet another group of students is disciplined in a different way. The next item that came up was work being recognized and appreciated. And specifically, when we look at work being recognized and appreciated, it is, well, let me just go back. So of the exit interviews, 45% of respondents stated that they did not receive consistent feedback. Yet every staff member stated that it would have been beneficial to receive additional feedback and recognition for what they were doing well to support their growth and, you know, that constructive feedback of here's what you can do to improve. And what we heard from many of the staff that left is, you know, I didn't feel like I could make a difference because it didn't feel like anything I did mattered to move the students forward. So I'm burnt out. So when we look at that, how can we celebrate the milestones while still knowing we have work to do? So that's the work being recognized and appreciated. And then the last one was employee concerns are addressed effectively. And when we specifically look at that, again, we're going back to discipline. I'm bringing forward a concern about a student or how to support a student, or I sent a student out and they're back, you know, I don't feel supported with that, so that's not addressed effectively. There was definitely some current concerns that came forward about compensation, about hiring practices. Are we seeing some themes? So those are some of the key things that really came out with the employee concerns being addressed effectively. Again, these dovetail together to the organizational policies and practices we discussed earlier. So let's take a look at, and I want to make sure that our screen catches up before I move forward. Okay, so this is looking at the length of stay within the district when we look at the data that we receive back. And so 36% of survey participants had been with the district less than 3 years. 33% of participants 4 to 10 years, and then 31% of participants 10 plus years. I want to make a clarification. This is not the percentage that left the district during this time period. This is the percentage that responded to the survey. I just want to make sure we're clear on what set of data we're looking at. So those that left the district in less than 3 years, 2 key points came forward. They needed greater support from administration to be successful. And these looked like classroom management. These look like, how do I ensure that I have the proper processes in place to be an effective educator, especially if this is my first year teaching straight out of college, right? The second were feelings and concerns not being addressed by administration. So those two really go hand in hand. One of the key things that came up in this specific area is mentoring programs. And I know Beloit's had some very strong mentoring programs in the past. And one of the things, kind of reading between the lines and asking some follow-up questions of the individuals that participated in the exit interviews is ensuring that in our mentoring programs, those that are mentors actually want to be mentors. Because we can have really great staff that aren't good mentors, right? They can be really good at their job, but they're not good mentors. And so when we're choosing our mentors, ensuring that they want to mentor and that they're really bringing those individuals up. The second piece with mentors is ensuring that mentors assigned were in the same field as the individuals that they were mentoring. So for example, having a music teacher mentor, an elementary school teacher, or having a music teacher at a high school, and this is hypothetical, okay, because I don't want to share anything that was protected information, mentor a math teacher that's in a completely different level with completely different metrics. So I just want to name that with the mentoring. In the 4 to 10 area, again, this was 33% of survey participants. The key here is this is relating to organizational policy, and it was feeling that there's salary compression. And that was a huge concern is, hey, the compensation doesn't feel fair to me. It's not perceived as it's fair. So knowing that you've got the salary levels, ensuring that those individuals perceive that they're not being compressed after they've been here for a number of years versus who's being brought in on year one. The third, in the 10 plus years of service, this was those individuals were most concerned about being recognized and appreciated for what they do. They're going, we've been here a long time. We're the mentors to these younger staff. We want to ensure that you're listening to what we have to say, where the rubber meets the road in either the classroom or as our secretaries or as our administrators in the school. All right, so let's take a look at the opportunities by school as we specifically break these out. And there's a couple things that we want to talk about specifically within the opportunities by school. And that is when we look at the support from district administration, we're seeing the difference from last year to this year is a 3.8 to a 3.1. So we're improving. Remember, this one's opposite, so I don't want anyone to get lost in that. And there's specifically with that this is going down, correct? So with that, there's some key areas that we're looking at here. And those that went up essentially said, hey, that's different than those that are going down within that area. The next was the organizational policies and practices. We saw all of these areas improve except for COLAC. The third being work recognized and appreciated. Some of the key comments within here, especially the schools that had that improve were, my leader and my principal took the time to either stop by my classroom or ask me how things were going. And that definitely improved. Now, again, one of the things I want to name is these are our exit interviews. These are not our climate surveys, right? So these are the individuals that are leaving. And yet, even though that these are improving, we still need to pay attention to, these are the key drivers as to why they're leaving. The third is employee concerns are being addressed effectively. And again, we're seeing a trend with some of those specific leaders as that comes through. All right, so then the last thing that
Tracy,
we'll look at.
Tracy, just so I'm clear and the audience is clear.
Yeah.
So when you go through those again, support from district administration, we go from a 3.8 to a 3.1, that's good.
Yep.
Next one, a 3 point, that's good, we're going trending down.
Yep.
Work being recognized and appreciated, going down, that's good.
Correct.
Okay.
And then the last one going up is good. Again, remembering how those were phrased when we first started. So if I go back to how those were phrased, the first three were based on your experience with the school district of Beloit. Please rate the importance of each of these items on your decision to leave. So if it's a 5, it means that was a significant reason for why I left.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And if the PowerPoint can catch up with where we want to go, correct?
And Board Member Anderson?
I just wanted to point out one thing, the PowerPoint that we were provided that's on board docs. If we look at our presentation, it shows that the second column for Colac is actually green, where it's 5. So if you can, could you resend this to us?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was
The most
something that we
accurate
found, for whatever reason, the formatting didn't fall through. So thank you for that, Spencer. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, I
and
just
I'll-
want to make sure the most accurate stuff's on there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at All right, so I'm just going to talk about this one. One of the things that we looked at is what is the correlation between your decision to leave the school district of Beloit. So one of the questions that we asked was not only would you return to the school district of Beloit, but we also asked the question of would you recommend the school district of Beloit to family and friends. That's a really important rating that we look at. And we did a correlation of that to specifically look at what is driving that number. So when staff were asked if they would recommend the district to family and friends as a great place to work, they rated that as a 2.2 as compared to a 1.9 last year. Again, the higher the rating, the better here, okay? So with that, that's one thing that we looked at. So what we see here is that there are some specific drivers to individuals leaving. The number one driver was employees' concerns were not addressed effectively. So, hey, I have a concern, I'm bringing that forward, what does that look like? So where's the, so the question is, where's the dispute resolution policy? If you've brought that to your specific leader and that's not addressed, what's the timeline that those things should be addressed in? And then where's that next level? Where does that go to next so that there is some accountability in that specific item? The next is, I cannot trust central administration and believe what it says. So we saw in the climate survey between the winter and the spring, this score improved significantly based on the communication that was coming from the interim superintendent. And that was something that was very positive, is, you know what, we finally feel like we have some transparent communication. We feel that we also know the goals of the district. So those were things that changed between the two surveys. The next one is, I can trust the building leadership and believe what it says. And we did see that start to increase. But again, these were those key drivers to not only the turnover, but them saying, I wouldn't recommend this to someone else to come take a look at it. So it's just important to know what's driving these sentiments. So on the slide that we have up, this was the spring 2020 survey. We wanted to do a comparison between what we're specifically doing in the exit and the spring. In the spring, we saw parent involvement in schools, appropriate interventions with students, student behavior, and class sizes just right to serve the students. Now, we know with COVID, our class sizes and the way that we teach have changed just a tad bit, right? Not always for the better, but they've changed, right, as we work on what this is. So I just wanted to bring this up again to say, these were some of those key items that came up in the climate survey. We're still seeing this again in the exit data. So when we get to taking action, there's the 4 key buckets that we're looking at, and I'm just gonna wait for my PowerPoint to catch up with yours. Maybe. So the 4 areas there were the fit to role. So when we look at the solutions specifically relating to engagement, ensuring we have the right people in the right roles, where that really came out is, hey, I have a degree to teach math, and yet you're having me teach 3 or 4 different subjects within a middle school, and I have 3 or 4 different subjects that I'm teaching. I can't do that well. So when we look at fit to role, that's a key area there. I'll name, one of the questions came out before, are we just talking about teachers, or are we talking about paras, or are we talking about administrators? Because those are our 3 buckets. It was really teachers that came out with that concern. We didn't see that really in the other 2 buckets. The next one is manager. We've talked a lot about the leadership tonight, about specifically what individuals need from the leadership in order to feel that they can do their job effectively. And then working closely as a team is that other one. And we saw, hey, this is one of our strengths. I really enjoy the team that I work with and believe that we can move those items forward. When we talk about teacher preparation and support, I think we need like the Jeopardy song to play as we wait for these to catch up, right? Okay, so teacher preparation and support, provide new teacher support and mentoring within a structured program with seasoned staff who want to mentor and coach new staff. Grow local programs focused on creating pathways into teaching. This is the Grow Your Own program, Megan, that you mentioned. I promised we would circle back around to it. And then creating an inclusive environment reflective of the student population. The next one that we had was relating to culture, and this is the school leadership. So within the school leadership culture, I know that the slides aren't caught up. I'm going to talk about what this is just so we can move this along, okay? Create robust leadership pipelines focused on fit to role for leaders. So what the national data really talked about is how do we grow our administrators and really ensure that they have the leadership skills to lead and not just the education or because they were a fantastic teacher. There's a key distinction between being a great leader and being a great doer, okay? Include staff retention as a key metric in the leadership performance. So for the leadership for that school, have that be a part of their performance process. So, and that it's not, you know, the hot potato or the hot egg as we move principals between schools every year. That was a key concern that was brought forward. And again, I'm reporting on what was shared from me, and I don't know what those numbers are. So that may be something that Joanne or Tanya could shine a little bit of a brighter light on. And then the next was to provide staff with transparent, we're still not caught up. Provide staff with transparent communication and feedback in a positive and inviting way that supports staff growth and student success. We also saw this in the national data that was one of the key ways. And then the last one is consistency and administrative leadership. And I asked staff, and you'll see this in the report, hey, you know, one of my favorite questions in exit interviews is if you had a magic wand to fix this problem, what would you do? And so many of these came specifically from that, and then we're matching it to what the national data is sharing. The fourth one is faith and process. Again, these are our organizational policies and procedures. Open, transparent communication to all levels of staff. If policies are changing, let us know specifically what that is. Consistent curriculum across schools. Again, I didn't really know where to put this item, but that was a key concern was, you know what, the curriculum between one school and the next is very different. There's not the consistency between that. And ensuring that staff, if staff are asked to be involved in the curriculum development, that they're not changed last minute. So that was some of the key items there. Consistent and equitable implementation of policies and practices, again, salary, hiring, and student discipline. And then the last was providing a dispute resolution policy with appropriate and timely follow through. That is what I have, and we're still stuck on climate. What questions do you have for me?
Any questions? Whoa. Okay, Board Member Levy has a question.
I do, and feel free to push it back if you're going to address it later. But as we talk about climate, kind of what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And I'm a firm believer that you should not make plans for recruitment until you have a plan to have the culture in place so that you can retain people. Were there specific suggestions, recommendations, either a part of the formal survey, or it sounds like you have a conversation with these former employees as well, that speaks to what the district can be doing to prepare the climate so that we can eventually do recruitment?
So I'm going to ask you to clarify that question because I want to ensure that when you say climate, I truly understand, because we talked a lot of items that impact climate tonight. So I want to ensure that I understand what you mean by that.
Sure. So specifically, as it relates to people of color, if people are feeling this is not a safe environment for them, this is not an environment where, as a person of color, I am valued, I am respected, I am etc. Were there specific things, like when you did the magic wand question, that as a Black, Indigenous person of color formerly working for this district, these things would have made me feel more at home here, more like I was recognized, supported, appreciated here?
Thank you for the question, Amy. And because I didn't specifically dig into that, and because I didn't have that specific data up front, I didn't a lot of times know specifically what an individual's race was. That isn't information that I had or that was provided ahead of time to that. So I want to name that, okay? However, did that come out in some of the conversations? Absolutely. And I'm going from memory because I don't have the data in front of me. So maybe that's something that we can wrap back around with. But some of the key things were, when we go to organizational policies and procedures, ensuring that our hiring practices and our promotion practices are fair and that we're following specifically what the policy is with that. One of the other things I want to name, and I'm going to step outside of the specific climate just from all of my work on diversity and inclusion with many different organizations, is diversity is about inviting people in. So Tanya and I did have a conversation about that. Where are we going to recruit individuals? Do we love that the slide finally pops up? Where do we go to recruit individuals into the organization? The way that we've done recruitment in the past is not going to give us a different answer. That's where the Grow Your Own programs really come in, is, hey, how do we grow our own from paras into certified teachers, specifically looking at growing our own students into teachers? Where's that pathway into teaching within our community in order to have that? And then where do we have the minority staff going to school for teaching degrees, and how can we start to tap into that? So that's one side of it. The other side of it is inclusion, right? So diversity is bringing individuals in. Inclusion, I like the analogy of dance, right? Diversity is inviting you to the dance. Inclusion is asking me to dance and me actually feel comfortable dancing with you, right? With that, I'm going to name, Amy, I don't have the data specifically on that, and it wasn't a question that I point blank asked.
Thank you. I appreciate your honesty and straightforwardness with that. How often do you restructure what your exit interviews look like? And by that, I specifically mean, now that we're having these conversations and this is an area of interest for our district, whenever you start your next round of exit surveys, can we implement this information in?
The constraint that we have to that is we're not going to be able to match it back, because some of this stuff is hard-coded with the data that we get into Tableau. It does create some additional issues. Can we do it? Yes, but we'll need to have a separate conversation about that, because when we went into this contract, it was, these are the questions we're going to use for the next 2 years. So yes, and Amy. And Megan, you had a question?
Thanks. Yeah, I did. Just a quick follow-up on the Grow Your Own piece. I really like what I heard about growing students into our district. Has there also been consideration, you talked about growing paras into certified teachers. If you do get a chance to share out some deeper dig stuff on the efficacy of Grow Your Own programs, I'm really curious if there's retention data showing how constructive it is also to help our certified teachers grow into administrators, like by, for example, providing like educational supports for them to take it to the next certification, et cetera. Because I mean, as a teacher, it's phenomenal to work in a diverse teaching staff. It's also really positive for the climate to work with a diverse set of administrators, and I think that Grow Your Own could be really powerful all the way through. And I'm just curious what existing data, if any, there is for that.
They're significant for that, so I'm happy to share those studies. They're cited within the report, but I'll be happy to pull them out.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Megan, if I can just add something here, we do have a residency program that I'm in collaboration with the University of Wisconsin-Madison with that we're growing our own. Last year we had 1 resident teacher, and this year we've got 5, and some of them are paras within our district. They're paid a $38,000 stipend to do an 18-month residency in our district, and they leave with a master's in special education with an opportunity to be hired and then 3 years of mentorship from the university.
That's so amazing. Thanks, Missy. I'm glad you jumped in.
And Dr. Kieser?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Board President Larson. Tracy, with what Ms. Beavers had just kind of shared with the solutions that you were sharing with us, was that, just so my understanding, were those the comments that came from the magic wand question, or was it results of the themes of the rationale why people were leaving? So for example, the resolution policy, did that specifically come up as a result of you asking if you had a magic wand and this could be fixed and you would stay here? Is that an outgrowth of that, or was it an outgrowth because there was a theme around not feeling supported in bringing an issue to their immediate supervisor and not feeling like it was resolved either timely or effectively or in some other way?
Yeah, so that one was really the outgrowth of the themes that we had pulled through and the concerns. It's also really an HR best practice to have a dispute resolution policy, and for staff to really know, if I have a concern, where do I go with that concern? And then what's that next level? So that answers that question. And then I also have the other part of your question, I believe, was, hey, those that were just on those last 4 slides, were those magic wand staff recommendations, or did that come from the national data? That was a combination. I'm happy to read what the staff recommendations were.
The reason why I was asking is in part, could part of the solution be that we have some of these things and people weren't aware that these things existed across the board?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I will name, I didn't ask that question because not being a school district employee, I don't know all the programs that were in place. Just like Missy just shared one with me, that's definitely a great program that, wasn't necessarily on my radar. So we just want to make sure that we, I don't always know to follow up with those questions on, hey, was that in place right now? So I can't give you great data there.
No worries. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Board Member Wong?
Tracy, thanks for all the information you provide. I think this is the 3rd or 4th time I've heard you present, so it's always nice to get the information. It's just a matter of, are we going to do something with it going forward to make an impact? But my question is, so you doing the climate survey as well as the exit survey, are you seeing some correlation between these two that says, yes, this is definitely the area of focus here? I mean, and that's not highlighted in this one. I mean, or maybe you've already mentioned it and I wasn't listening, so.
Yeah. So the key things that we're seeing as far as themes is consistency with district administration, and that includes both at COLAC and specifically with the principals within the school. So, the superintendent and the principals, that consistency, that's the first one. The second one that it consistently comes forward is discipline. How do we handle student behaviors in a way that supports students to be successful and supports teachers and our staff to be successful? So we've seen variations of that come forward, but those are really 2 of the key things. Yes, there's subgroups of that, like, the transparent communication, or I know and understand the goals of the district is linked directly back to consistent administration.
Thank you.
Yes.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. I always we've been doing this for like 2-ish years now, so I'm glad to start seeing how the data is shaping up and how we have data going back for a couple of years now, and I'm anxious to see how it continues to change as we improve. Thank you very much for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this brings us to the Children at Risk report.
So tonight we have Mitch. There we go. Whoops. There you go. Turn off. So we have Mitch coming to present the Student at Risk report. He's our CT Director of Career and Technical Education Alternative Programs, and so this is a statutory report that gets presented to the board, and so as soon as he is ready to share his screen, I'll turn it over to him.
I'm sharing right now. I'm hoping it's going to catch up here. I believe. Let's make sure. There we are. Okay. Well, thanks so much for having me here to speak about this plan today. And first, I'm going to step a little bit out of my lane and give Rochelle Elliott some credit for proactively addressing one of the main concerns that Mitch brought up, which was how we're mentoring teachers in the district. Rochelle has been spearheading our new mentor program. It's all volunteer mentors. They're receiving professional training. And she really worked hard to get a diverse cross-section, so we're going to provide those new staff members with teachers that are highly trained specifically in their areas. So looking to see some really great outcomes for that, for supporting our staff. Back to this, our 2020 Children at Risk plan. As Dr. Keyser said, this is a requirement from the Wisconsin DPI that every district develops a plan on how we are going to support these students who are at risk of not graduating or not graduating on time. So that's the specific statutory language, just so it's very clear. And there's some critical criteria that we want to follow when we're looking at this report. First of all, we're focusing on students grades 5 through 12. That's how it's written in the statute, but obviously it's a concern for our younger students. We're reaching all the way back from 4 all the way to pre-K, so that we're able to start looking at some metrics or identifying those students early so we can get to them and get them on track. So first of all, to be an at-risk student, you would need to fall into 2 or more of the following categories. The first one being 1 or more years behind their age group in the number of credits attained. So that's going to apply to our high school students only. That's where they're earning the credits. The second criteria is 2 or more years behind their age group in basic skill levels. There we're using our standardized testing and our internal testing that we do to measure those students' skill levels, which we'll see in a little bit. Our habitual truants, as defined by the state. So it's a student that is missing all or part of 5 or more days in a semester, right? Some of our students who have had children, adjudicated delinquents, and 8th grade pupils whose score in each subject area on an examination was below the basic skill level, or they are not going to be promoted into 9th grade and the high school. So for this group, we're looking at people who are meeting 2 of those things. So how do we find the data? With this report, you have to pull from all of our sources. Every resource we have to dig deep into it, reach out to every department of the district so that we're getting accurate data. So we're using Skyward for attendance and monitoring credit attainment. We're using our MAP, Forward, Aspire, and ACT data for looking at our skill level and our grade level for students on grade level for obtaining those skills. And then, of course, our pupil services staff who are working with some of our students that have some real challenges, our adjudicated delinquents, students that are being retained, and our teen parents. So then once you have that data, what do you do with it? We have to put together a plan and be reactive and move as quick as possible so that we're getting those students the resources and experiences that they need so they don't fall any further behind. So that's where our SIT team, our student intervention team, works at a school level. And this is a team of professionals that identify students who are struggling grades, attendance, behavior, and credits. So in this SIT team, we can have school administrators, we can have teachers, we can have school psychologists, school social workers. The whole team comes together collaboratively to try to work out a plan. And they're including the parents on that. They're including the caregivers or guardians, whoever's at home with that student to help them achieve. So one change that I'd like to make for this year is our SIT teams and our interdisciplinary problem-solving teams are doing a great job at a school level, but it's also great to track some of that data at a district level, the macro data, so we can see how we're progressing as a district and how we're meeting some of these needs with students so that our programming aligns with our data and aligns with our student needs. A requirement of creating a plan for student success is sending letters home to the families so that they're aware of the deficits that their students have and the plans and options that we're going to provide for them to get them where they need to be. So this leads to a meeting with the student, parents, guardians, grandparents, whoever, to plan those interventions. It's not a one-time thing. You have to continuously do progress monitoring, keep checking in with the students, because we know when you have some challenges, a lot of times those challenges can multiply and change throughout your experience during the year. So we want to find out where those students are at and be really responsive to their needs. We work to connect them with mentors, counselors, and school social workers if they need that. We look at how we can modify curriculum so that they're able to learn the same standards, but perhaps in a different way that's going to allow them to stay on track and a lot of times close a gap if they're falling behind. Adjust their schedule. Change how their courses are going so that perhaps they have a little bit more time to do a credit recovery class or a specific intervention. Credit recovery is something that we like to do to help close that gap so that they're going to be able to graduate on time. And of course, full placement or a choice to experience one of our alternative education programs. So we have several that we're going to talk a little bit about, I believe, on the next slide here. And then, of course, we have our community resources, SAPAR, and, of course, BLA, which houses multiple different options, all in one building for students with various different specific needs. Again, plans for student success. We have students that maybe they're just starting to slip a little bit. Maybe they didn't do as well in a course as they needed to and failed it. So we have some work closely with the counselors and our credit recovery teachers to build out their schedule and give them the opportunities to retake a course either through Apex or Edgenuity, which are both online credit recovery programs. In the near future, you'll have another presentation from me about these two programs, and you'll see that they're not just for credit recovery anymore. You can do initial credit, and there's also tutorials, so we can identify skill deficits and then directly remediate those through some of the programming. Intervention for our younger students specifically that are below grade level and need to work on some specific skills so that they continue to improve, close the gap, and be successful. Beloit Learning Academy, which is very pointed solutions, very specific solutions for different student needs. And of course, we partner with Fresh Start, the Challenge Academy, and of course, we offer GEDO 2 as well for our students that are looking to get that certificate.
We have a couple of questions already. Do you want us to ask them now or? Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Board Member Levy has the first question.
Actually, I'm going to sneak in two. The first one is I know that this is a lot to develop the plan, track down student and family, and then get buy-in, and then do follow-up. Logistically, who is doing the case management, and are there any discussions of potentially creating new roles in the district to solely house or to manage case management? And then my second question is, can you implement a plan if you're not able to get in touch with the parent or have parent buy-in, et cetera?
Okay, the two questions. Case management. Right now, that's somewhat unique to the building. So depending on the student need, so there's kind of a spectrum. So there's our students that have 2 or 3 out of the criteria, and so a student like that, you will have to look at specifically where the deficit is, and then the case manager will suit those specific needs. Is there room to change some roles and to re-examine some of this stuff? Definitely. So right now I've been scheduling the meetings and specifically working with Tina Gex and Betsy at BLA to understand the system better, to start sitting into some of the SIT meetings to see where we're doing well and where we have some room to improve. And then the other main part of this is looking at things outcome-based. So in the past, the data hasn't always been tracked at a district level and followed and prioritized so that all of our programming aligned with that. And I'd like for that to start happening. So yes, I agree that there's some possibility we could have some changing in staffing based on that need, but we just want to drive that decision based on what our professionals already are recommending to us, and then also the data on what our students' numbers require as well. Does that answer your question?
No, my first question is who is currently doing the case management? And then the second question is, are you able to implement a plan if you don't have parent buy-in?
Can you implement a plan without parent buy-in? Yes, you can. So for example, we have numerous students who are McKinney-Vento, homeless. So yes, we're still able to implement those plans, and we do have students whose parents are not active participants in the plans. So it is of course a challenge, but we do our best that we can to meet every student's needs. Right now I have I've scheduled the meeting with some of our school psychologists, so I understand the process better for the case management for each student. And I'm also going to be working with Ms. Beavers, who oversees this department as well.
Thank you.
Okay. And then Board Member Anderson has a question also.
So as you guys do your interventions, how often do these come out as like the kid needing a 504 plan or an IEP? Because a lot of times when the kids are falling behind, it might be just that they learn at a different rate.
Are you saying percentage-wise, if you're referred to services, how often would you end up with a 504 plan or an IEP based on that?
So like when you guys have your SIT team meetings, how often do they actually go to a 504 or an IEP?
I think it would depend on the age of the student for how quickly we're identifying them. I have not been in that role long enough to be able to specifically answer that as far as what percentage would be referred, but that is one of the core components, is looking at if the student is learning and then referring them to any services that they need, and special education is definitely one of those. So those people are brought in right away. And it is, when we look at risk, addressing the needs of our special education students is a real priority as well, because you'll find a lot of students that have some of these criteria also need special ed services.
I just want to jump in and share that where the one doesn't necessarily flow into the other. So just because you've been identified as a student at risk doesn't default to going down a path that would lead to a 504 or an IEP. Likewise, a student who has a 504 or an IEP isn't always a student who would be identified as at risk. They would be identified, they certainly have a need to be addressed that falls within the statute, but they're not necessarily linked in that fashion.
Yeah, just to kind of clarify, I was like, because I don't know, like maybe when you guys actually have your SIT team meetings, that maybe you identify a kid that wasn't previously identified as a kid that needed those types of services right through the schools.
And I have not sat on the SIP teams, but my past experiences are exactly, anytime we have support systems, we're looking at what is the specific need of the student, and then what is the least restrictive support that we can put in place to help the student. But certainly it does uncover something that perhaps we wouldn't have seen any other way. Yep.
And Board Member Jacobs.
Hi, I realize we're talking about the state statutes grades 5 and up, and perhaps this is not the right time, but for future board meeting date. But I'm very interested in knowing what we're doing for our babies that are just entering our schools and are already behind by 3rd grade, because in my opinion, they're already at risk, even though it's not a state statute.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm not sure that. Oh,
No,
I'm
that-
sorry, Mitch, or
1, 2, 3.
whoever.
I'm going to go.
Go ahead.
Okay. That's a great point. So I led with that. For the purpose of this, 5 through 12 is the data we're looking at. So it's kind of a, it's as you see it when we jump into the data here a little bit, it's a lot. But there's absolutely no argument that identifying our students before 3rd grade, especially if they're below grade level for reading, is critical importance. That's where I'm collaborating with Rochelle Elliott also, and we're working together to see what supports we can put into place universally for those little kids, so that they're able to close those gaps as soon as possible, because we know if you don't close those gaps, if you remain below grade level, you become more and more frustrated, more and more disengaged, and these problems will compound. So the best thing that we can do for those students, of course, we're going to provide the supports, of course, we're going to provide the school social workers and things like that, but we also have to provide excellent instruction and excellent tier 1 intervention in the classroom, so that we're looking at every single child and making sure every single child is learning at on grade level or above grade level.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you.
And Board Member Delgado.
I just have a question. I'm not sure if this can be answered through here, but so with this process, who's responsible to make sure that the process is being followed, like within the schools? Are they assigned like a caseworker or a social worker, or how do you keep track of that? How do you keep track that those processes are being followed in the school?
The people that would be reinforcing the process would typically be an assistant principal or a principal, so that they're making sure that all the parties are meeting together frequently, and then helping kind of structure the process so each individual can do their job in the process.
Thank you.
Those are all the questions we have so far. Okay, thank you.
All right. So we'll just jump into the data here, and we're going to keep it relatively high level. Dr. Keyser?
Yeah, just when you've talked about the SIP team, who sits on the SIP team? Because you just mentioned assistant principals and school psychs. So who actually sits on that SIP team that talks about these individual students?
Right. We have our school psychs. We can have a school social worker. We're going to have classroom teachers. A lot of times we'll recruit one of our special ed teachers as well, our program manager, so that they're involved in the process. Assistant principals, even our building level principals will also get involved in the process as well.
And do they follow up on these students on a regular basis?
They do. We have frequent meetings, and their progress is tracked, and plans are changed as needed be. And also our school counselors especially work with our high school students to track those students who are falling behind on credits, because that's an issue that we face right now.
And so to an earlier question, when we talk about a case management, is it the team's responsibility to bring this back, or do they assign an individual person to follow up and then bring progress back to that team?
I'm gonna have to dig into that process a little deeper and get back to you.
Thank you.
I want to say the answer, but I'm gonna wait. All right, so for the current data, this is data as accurate as possible as of July and early August. And we're going to keep it a little bit high level, so we're not digging deep into buildings and all of this stuff, because you can break it out into subgroups and everything like that. But for right now, we just want to give kind of a broad presentation of what we're looking at this time. And so once again, this is entering grades 5 through 12. So habitually truant, we see our numbers here based on which grade they're entering, and the total right there, 1,409 students.
We have another question before you go on. Board Member Wong.
Yeah, Mitch. Question on the truancy one is, I mean, this equates to, if we just by rough averages, and this does not even take into account by grade level, but if we just take the number of students that you have up there, which is 1,409, and divide that into 6,500, which we're taking the entire student population, that equates out to roughly 21.67%. And like I said, that number is probably, that percentage is probably low in comparison to what the data where we're pulling from. My question with that is this, do we have any idea how this compares to national or state averages? And then I have a few other questions. And one, is this number consistent year in and year out? Do we have any data to support that? And then lastly is, who's responsible for keeping track of the truancy? Because I know this is something that's come up in the past, and typically when we've seen expulsions, there's a correlation, direct correlation between absenteeism and some of these children. Also, it's not rockets. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out if you're not in the classroom, you can't learn. So, a lot thrown at you there. Can you, I guess?
Yes, I'll start with point A. Yeah, I led with habitual truancy because if they're not with us, then, and I'm not talking about distance learning or virtual learning, but if they're not with us, if they're not attending school, how can we administer any of these programs? How can we do interventions? How can we test and assess and do all the things that we need to do? And we can't. So that's why I'm leading with this, and I don't want to over dramatize this, but this is pretty much a critical problem right here. And I'll have to dig a little deeper on find a city that matches our demographics, matches our size, and see how we compare to some of those. And I can bring that data back for you. But even if we knew what national averages are today, or state average or city average, we can all say that 1,409 is not acceptable. Right? We're not doing the best we can if those students aren't there as frequently as possible. So this is the first time I've delivered this report. I didn't see the report from last year, but tracking that trend over time is going to be huge. So that's one of those things where how are we implementing PBIS effectively so we're getting these kids in the school? How are we making sure that they feel welcome? How are they making sure they feel safe and comforted? Do they have that relationship with at least one positive professional adult that gets them to school every single day? So that is a priority, and going forward, yeah, we will be tracking this. and then looking at how our interventions like PBIS and improving all these things will be helping it. Everything that we do aligns to these deficits. So when you talk about implementing career academies, one of the there's two big things about career academies. There's two big ones. The number one is improving engagement through promoting students' interest in their future, in their careers, right? You weave that career interest throughout all of their subjects. The second thing that goes unmentioned a lot of times is each career academy is a small learning community where interdisciplinary teams of teachers are coming together, and on a weekly basis, they're meeting and talking about students that are starting to slip, students that are falling behind between the cracks, students that are not attending all of a sudden. And then during that time, they find out, all right, who has a relationship with this student? Who can reach out? Should we refer them to the SIT team? Do we need to refer them to the school counselor to figure out their credits, school psychologist if they have some issues like that, school social worker, maybe they have instability at home. So that's our first line of defense, so that because our numbers are great, our need is great. So we need all hands on deck that are helping to meet these students where they're at and get them the services as fast as possible. Hopefully that answered it. I'll double check on the data for national truancy. Credit deficiencies. So we have this broken down by our high schools, BMHS, BLA, and BVS. So total 163 students. The one thing to consider with this is you're talking about ninth graders entering high school. So none of those students are on here, those ones that could be below in skill level. So as soon as they hit high school, there's a good potential that they're gonna fail some classes, right? So that's one thing that we want to think about and be really proactive with our freshman students to make sure they launch strong at the high school so they don't start falling behind that first year. Critical. 2 or more years behind basic skills. For this, I pulled just math and then ELA. So those are numbers of students right there, grades 5 through 9. So when you're 2 or more years behind in those basic skills, that's going to require some pretty focused intervention to close that gap, because the days are going by and you have to grow, right? You have to have growth greater than the average for your grade level. Any questions on that one? Current data that I was able to find for our students that have had kids were 23, and you can see, I have to dig deeper in this to just verify this, but a lot of these students started off at BMHS and then they end up at BLA. So I'm digging deeper into that, how that system works, how that transition happens. And we, as of right now, we're looking at around 86 adjudicated delinquents district-wide, and that is as of early August. That changes pretty frequently. I think Ms. Levy has a question.
Go ahead, Board Member Levy.
Not a question, but just kind of a comment or some information to ask with your inquiry. I know at least up through last year that if you were a student that was pregnant or parenting and you needed to change placement because you want to participate in the program at Head Start or you need to be in a different building, then that would be an exemption. You would bypass SIT, and as long as your parent consented and the AP at your home school, then you would bypass the SIT meeting. So that may be some of the explanation for how students are ending up at BLA.
Thank you. Okay, next steps. This is a new role for me, so number one, I have lots of learning to do, lots of meetings scheduled, and I've already been to a lot of them, and diving deep into all aspects of our organization and how all of our people do great work to help serve our students. Right now, our ACT data is still on a stack of paper, and as soon as they release it to us in our spreadsheet form, then that'll all start getting migrated into the system so that we can start tracking where our students are at with skill levels there. Working to process this data at a building level, so we're looking at those students that meet 1, 2, 3, 4 of the criteria, so that we're going to be able to identify them and get them into some meetings so that we're making some plans for them. Mail letters to families for each of the students that are meeting 2 of the criteria. Continue conducting building level meetings. Enroll our students in the programs as needed. And then, of course, monitor their progress, both at a building micro level and then at the district macro level. Questions and comments?
Go ahead, Board Member Miller.
I just want to thank you very much for your work on this presentation, and I always like to take opportunities to brag about what a great job you do with our CTE, so let it be known. Brag. I have 2 questions that are kind of related. I'll ask my specific question first. I was going to ask about what additional resources and supports do you want to put on our radar, but I just first want to specifically ask if, I guess, what possible supports or additional resources, and if you don't have an answer for this right away, it's fine, I'm just curious, could you identify that maybe we need to start thinking about to be more supportive at the intermediate level to anticipate and help with that transition into 9th grade? So that's my first part of my question. I'll go ahead and let you.
Okay, I'm not going to speak on which supports we need right now, because I want to make sure that I can present the data that supports that and make sure it's all best practice. And most importantly, the boots on the ground who have been doing this work really have intimate knowledge of what supports they need. So I would take my cue from them to see how I could support them best. That's been my goal and my role ever since I've been able to take on some of these duties, is just really talking with people, digesting what they needed, documenting it so that I can bring it to the district level so we can get those resources allocated. With intermediates, I think there's a strong need in some of our intermediates for different things, including the academic intervention, and then also some of those, the behavior interventions and the soft skills interventions as well. Along with that comes a lot of other things, our culturally responsive practices and all of our other trainings that we've been putting together as well. So it has to be all part of a district strategic plan, something large like that. You can't roll something like that out overnight. So we want to make sure all of our intermediate principals and APs and staff there is included in the conversation so that they feel heard and that we're meeting their needs very specifically, and we're not trying to deliver them a solution that doesn't actually fit what would help them.
Thanks, I really appreciate that, and that's really good for us to know as we've been diving into short-term goals and all that. I guess the second piece is I heard you talk a lot about being outcomes-based and what an asset you feel like it'll be when we do district-wide tracking. I'm just curious if there are any other barriers or the flip side of that would just be, additional supports or resources, again, that you want to put on our radar overall. Side note, I really appreciated when we had an opportunity last year to hear about the career academies, and the presenters talked about how if students had 5 involved adults in their lives, like that was like the #1 influencer to keep them in school. I really appreciate that you brought that piece into your presentation here. So again, just other ways that you want our board to be aware of how we want to support going forward.
Right. So I think all the district programs should be, all the strands have to continually be tighten the braid, right? So all of our programs are working together and supporting one another, so it makes a more cohesive and a stronger system in general. It's more responsive and more able to meet some of these large demands. As far as the biggest part that we're going to have to look at is being very intentional with data. So Mark Grunsky, I'll have to give another shout out to Mark. He's started as a social studies coordinator, but has grown into so much more. Working with EduClimber making data very easy to process, very quick for principals to access. All of these different, there's different elements of data that it can take so much time to just dig in. But when you can process it in a quicker manner and the district can help facilitate some of those more poignant discussions, then things go a lot quicker and better decisions are made. So I would roll all of the at-risk stuff into that same bucket. That's my new phrase that I learned from a shark. I'm gonna use bucket a lot more. So we're gonna put in that bucket and we're going to be really intentional with our data. And, you know, with a lot of these students, it really is that one-on-one. It is that personal relationship. And I think we have really dedicated staff members who every day, that's a big part of why they work in this district, is because that's their life's work. So the systems and supports are just supporting those people that are really doing the heavy lifting. And going forward, I think we'll just continue to build those.
Thanks, and I'm going to cheat and sneak in one last question to dovetail off of something you just said. Sorry, folks. So when you talk about facilitating personal relationships with our students, can you speak to, and I know that this year's a little wonky, but could you speak to the role that the relationships that our students in work-based learning have with community members in a work-based learning sense, or just other opportunities for mentorship? Can you speak to the role that currently plays in this and how you see that growing?
Right, I think the phase 2 of Ford NGL is a nice vehicle to get us there, to get us to the next level. Right now we're doing a lot of work and we're all working really hard, but it's so easy when your resources are your own and when your time is limited to start to become kind of siloed, right? You have a couple key contacts and you're able to help in a few ways, but having a district-wide, I would propose a district-wide partnership program where we formally recognize all of our corporate, business, community partners and acknowledge their donations of their time, their expertise, or their resources to work with our students. Taking on a youth apprentice is a huge commitment, but it also pays huge dividends. We've had some extremely successful graduates that have gone immediately into the workforce. And the new model is not necessarily that you have to spend 2 years, 4 years in a college before you can find great employment. We had one student that went to a local manufacturer, very successful. Went to different areas, found out that he really enjoyed the inspection department. They sent him to training for non-destructive testing out of state. I mean, is just a 19-year-old young man, came back with these credentials and is doing some pretty incredibly important work with some very high-tech equipment, and he's got it really set up. Another example of that is Career Tech had the first career program this year, and I think they were set to place 26 students in entry-level positions in the community. COVID hit, of course, so many of those dissolved, but they still were able to place a young man at CCI. He ended up doing a job shadow, working with a construction crew, and he was actually one of our BLA students. And I cannot give him enough credit. He's actually doing masonry work, and you know, if you are just starting off in masonry, you don't start off buttering bricks. You start off mixing mud, hauling the bricks, and doing all that stuff. But at the end of the day, he has a huge smile on his face. He has a 401k, and his parents are just incredibly proud. It just turned his whole life around. Those type of experiences, they're critical.
Thank you so much.
Board Member Wong.
I think Board Member Levy was ahead of me.
Nope, my question had already been answered.
Okay. Mitch, I just had a follow-up, and I know this isn't going to be an exact number, but I was just doing some quick math because the number of 21 or 22% seemed alarming, but that's not even, I think, what I did was I took 6,500 students divided by 13 grades. It comes up to 500 students per grade. So a rough average would mean that our truancy rate for those grades is actually over 35% if we just did rough math on that. And that should be a wake-up call, not just to the district, but I think the community as a whole. You know, there's a saying that says that, to raise a child, it takes a community or a village. And I think that we need to really reach out, and we need to, it's not just the parents, but it's the nonprofits, it's the businesses, as well as obviously we need to do our part as well. And I don't know if this is gonna, how far this is gonna reach everybody, but I hope that everybody wakes up to that fact if they're listening to this meeting tonight, so.
I agree. This is a community, I've always said this, that is incredibly giving with their time. Dr. Keyser, when I think he was only in his role for a few weeks, and already he's had an outpouring of support, people looking to help do the heavy lifting with us. So it's just a matter of us really respecting and cultivating those relationships and the things that they're willing to provide.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't see any more. Thank you again for your presentation.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it's that time again. I move that we extend the meeting time by 30 minutes so we can conduct the rest of our board business.
Is there a second?
I second that.
All right, we have a motion, a second to extend the board meeting time by 30 minutes. Are there any questions or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries and the meeting has been extended 30 minutes, which brings us to Superintendent's report to the board, convocation, community partnerships, and COVID update.
All right, thank you, Board President Larson. I'll make this quick with the exception of my first comment for the board report, which I'd like to just take a moment of reflection for the Blake family. I'm just going to be quiet here for a second. Our community has been faced with a lot of challenges, both locally, but also state and nationally. So I bring this up, bring the Blake family up to start my comments, knowing that once again our community is in distress and has been for quite a while, and something that we continue to wrestle with, each and every one of us individually and then collectively as a group. So keep that in the back, keep that in our forethoughts as we continue to do the deep work that we need to do. Today we had our convocation, and I was very excited and nervous to launch a convocation, my very first one here in Beloit, and doing it virtually. So talk about firsts. We had just under 700 staff members, all connected via Zoom. And thank you to the staff members who reached out to me and told me to fix my collar as I had my jacket on and so forth. But we had great words from Board President Larson, BEA President Vedra, and then our speaker, Tom Murray, who brought to us a message around being personal and authentic amidst adversity. Speaking about COVID and all of that, the messages that he shared were vast and many, and I've heard feedback already from a couple of different sources, and I was out at Merrill Elementary School on a walking tour of the neighborhood and the community garden, and had feedback about how powerful his message was. Just a quick synopsis. the key takeaways that he shared, and I summarized at the closing of convocation that, culture is built 30 seconds at a time. When you think about all of our interactions that we have on a day, how many of those interactions are 30 seconds or less? And if we don't think about how important those 30 seconds are, we miss an entire opportunity to create the culture that we're looking for. He also delivered the message of leading with purpose means that we control those things that are controllable to us, really reminding us that there are a lot of things that are outside of our control, but what we can control is defined by the purpose that we lead. And the final message was one that was coming in a video by Michael Jr., who said, when you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you are walking in or towards your purpose. So talk about 2 hours of online virtual meeting, and it went by quickly. So that was a great way to start the day. Community partnerships. The outpouring of partnerships in the 2 months that I've been here has been fantastic. I highlighted to the board a couple of things, and for the public, the YMCA is reached out and is offering opportunities for families to, for a cost, have their students be at the Y for the day, where they would have access to the Y services as well as opportunities to do tutoring and connect to the Wi-Fi and do their learning. The Boys and Girls Club similarly has openings for people to drop in at no cost. They reached out to us and asked about how we could support them, and specifically they were asking for chairs and desks, and we're very much happy to provide them with desks and chairs that we were going to surplus, and we're said have these, and please, if there are other resources, to please let us know. I know the hot off the press, the Beloit Library is messaging out this free online tutoring where students can get homework help, submit questions, interact with live tutors in a digital space, create and form online study groups, and even practice standardized tests online. So this Brain Fuse is going to be messaged out in my next weekly update. I'm actually meeting with the Y, the Boys and Girls Club Community Action, the library, and other community members that have reached out to look at other opportunities that we can provide our students and families during our time of distance learning. So great news to be sharing out, and one that I'm very excited to keep messaging out. Lastly, just in terms of COVID update, we continue to meet with the Rock County Health Department as Rock County superintendents. Happy to say that the feedback that we've been giving them, while we wish the situation was one where they could have stronger language, we understand that they can provide us with strong guidance, and it leaves it up to us to make take those guidance and turn it into our recommendations. Currently, Rock County is at just over 4% positive rate for 14-day average. It is a downward trend. That is good. That means things are getting better. We have hospitalizations at 4 individuals at this point. And that has been a decline and actually holding steady. And the week updates will continue. Even though this does not change any decisions we have made as a board, it is information that I want to bring to the board on a regular basis so that the board stays updated on the weekly meetings that I attend as part of the Rock County Superintendents. So that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Dr. Keyser. Brings us to committee reports. The first one, Planning and Budget, would be Board Member Wong.
Board President Larson, did you want all 3 months a recap of everything, or do you want me to hit the high points? I'm just noticing that on there.
You can go ahead and hit the high points, please.
Okay, in respect of time. Okay, for the month of August, the Planning and Budget Committee met on the 4th of August, and there was two items that we discussed. First one was teachers on call, and we received information. Actually, we received it a couple of times in the last few months in regards to the teachers on call and metrics that were used, and we made the determination to cancel that contract, which eventually went to the board for approval. Also, we had the ad hoc committee for language barrier, and let me make sure I get this correct, because there was the charge that was put forth for that. And I'd like to thank Board Member Miller for taking this on, us under her wing. The charge that was created was assessing current language barriers in the school district of Beloit and advise actions to remove those barriers between parents, community, and the school district. Let's see, so that was August meeting. In July, and actually there really wasn't much, that was the main 2 items. We also had a tech refresh in June that we had, and there was a WAN, E-rate WAN connection update as well. Those are long gone. That seems like eternity ago. So our next meeting will be on September 1st at 5:15. And that'll be either in person or virtual. So that wraps up the Planning and Budget Committee report.
All right, thank you. Oversight and Finance Committee, Board Member Levy, please.
So the Oversight and Finance Committee met on Tuesday, July 14th. The committee approved the agenda and the minutes from June 9th. Thank you to Mrs. Armstrong for walking us through an in-depth review of our financial reports for May. She pointed out items of particular interest and drew our attention to explanations included at the bottom of most pages of the report. So examples of these would be decrease in investment interest due to entry allocation to other funds, or salary and fringe benefits are in line with expected adjustments, or the final one that I'll throw out is substitute costs for 2019-2020 coded as educational services payment rather than salary and fringe benefits. So why do I bring those up? As you're reviewing the financial documents for our district, she does a really nice job of explaining things that may come up as questions. So the point is, if you have a question, Ms. Armstrong and her team have said that they will make themselves available to answer those questions, to do individual walkthroughs. But I would encourage you to check the little notes at the bottom of each page, because a lot of your questions may be answered there. So I appreciate that. I would encourage everyone, if you're interested in learning more about school finance or how we review our reports, what things you should be looking out for when you review reports, to go and view that July meeting. Again, that was July 14th. And then an additional reminder is once the budget is approved in October, activities related to the 2020-2021 school year will transfer from Planning and Budget to Oversight and Finance Committee for the current year. And then our Oversight and Finance Committee meeting for August was canceled so the administrative team could focus on the district audit. So our next meeting, which is going to be September 8th, time to be determined, will be the last 2 months.
Thank you very much. Policy and Personnel, Board Member Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just that time of year, so we've been approving lots of personnel recommendations. I'm just going to cover very quickly June and July. So June 9th, we had a policy for first reading for the posthumous diplomas, and it was recommended to send that policy to the full board with revisions for first reading. And on June 23rd, we had just one informational item, and that was the superintendent's organizational chart. It's hard to think back that was Mrs. Green was the superintendent at that time. And again, we approved the June 23rd personnel recs. At our July 14th meeting, we discussed the harassment and Title IX policies, and the committee recommended approval of the revisions and layover of the harassment and Title I policies to the full Board of Ed. And we also discussed policy 443-447, student code of conduct and discipline. And again, the committee recommended the revisions and layover of policy 443, 447, student code of conduct to the full Board of Education. And we also approved employment recommendations, Exhibit A and B. And sorry, I did not write anything about August. I was under the impression that we did it month by month, so I apologize for that, and I will hit that next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Governance Committee, which the board president also chairs, we met for the first time July 28th, and then we met again today, August 25th, and the two big things that we're working on in the Governance Committee that we spoke about in both meetings was the board calendar. Right now, it's kind of a piece of paper with just like items on it with no real description or understanding of why they're on there. So in a process to make our meetings more efficient and use our committee structure properly, Dr. Keyser, the board secretary, the cabinet, and I are going to be working on creating a document that uses the committees and is something you can pick up and use to set the agendas and understand why they're on the agenda. The other thing that we are working on is a survey for our current board members as far as the orientation onboarding process about what things have, what learning do they feel like they have had adequate of, and what other areas do we need more support in, as well as we have done a number of webinars and workshops already this year, so how many of those are beneficial, and then using that to plan a sustainable and thorough onboarding process for incoming board members, as well as good refreshers for veteran board members. So that work is still continuing. With the board calendar, we're hoping to have that done by the end of October at our governance meeting. It's turned into a bigger project than expected. So we will meet again on September 29th, and again, the time would be determined sometime before the business meeting. And that brings us to our legislative update with Vice President Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just going to quick share my screen, and I will be brief. Sorry. Okay. So this should be in board docs for those at home who want to follow along. This is our August legislative update. You may recall from back in May, when I think we did our first one, or maybe it was April, due to Senate Joint Resolution 1, there's not going to be any progress on the current legislation that's in the House that at all, but particularly those that apply to education due to COVID. But I did continue to list all of those items that are up for discussion when they do decide to reconvene. That being said, just some local announcements. Rock County on June 10th, moved into phase 2 for their phased reopening plan, which is hyperlinked here, and you can click on and see the details of it if you'd like. The city of Beloit continues to pass its own resolutions, and both the city and the county comply with the CDC recommendations. All buildings and spaces that are open in the city of Beloit are recommended to include these guidelines, and the city also discourages mass gatherings of more than 25 people at this time. There is some contact information for you, and just the two other updates I'd like to share before I conclude is that at our most recent CISA 2 meeting, there was a call to action that asks school boards and school board members, administrators, teachers, paras, anybody in our district, and parents, of course, are encouraged to reach out to let legislators know how students with special needs and other students who are marginalized are being impacted by COVID-19, so there can be continued dialogue about resources and responsiveness to our most vulnerable students. You can reach out to any of the folks that are listed above here, Representatives Spreitzer or Loudenbeck, or Senators Ringhander, Nass. Last update is that the Wisconsin, just a little while ago, Dr. Kieser talked about the wonderful opportunities that our community partners are providing for our students to have some flexibility with where they do their distance learning. And recently, Wisconsin Shares, which is how folks have access to childcare who meet a certain income requirement, Shares is now being funded out of the CARES Act funding to include access for school-age childcare. So if you are eligible for Shares, or if you're not sure, there's some resources hyperlinked here. You might be eligible to get assistance to pay for school-age childcare due to that act that the state, I've ran out of vocabulary, that the state enacted. So that concludes my legislative update. And if you have any questions, anybody? Good? All right. Thanks, folks.
All right.
Oh,
sorry, Megan.
Yep.
Quick one. I see that you listed, did you mention the 3-year online early learning program for low-income children?
So there's currently proposed legislation for an early learning program. Is that what you're talking about, or did I miss something?
Is that passed into law?
It's not, because of that Senate Joint Resolution 1. None of these have been passed yet. So they're at wherever wherever their status was prior to COVID. But the whole, based on a conversation I had with Representative Spreitzer a few months ago, they were anticipating going back into session around Thanksgiving optimistically, and he said hopefully by the end of the year.
Okay, and I'm sure hoping that our district's going to go for whatever we need to do to, I see it's only 3 urban districts, so we're going to have some stiff competition, and I'd love to see Beloit get that.
Absolutely, and for those watching at home, if you feel strongly about that, you can contact your representatives and let them know that you think Beloit should be considered for that once it passes. Thanks,
Megan.
Yeah, any other questions? All right, thanks.
All right, thank you, Vice President Miller. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. So on the consent agenda, we have the proposal to increase substitute pay rates, suspension of portions of policy 171 regular board meetings, policy review process, the employment recommendations exhibit A for August 25th, 2020. Is there anything any board member would like pulled off of the consent agenda? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move approval of the consent agenda items.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Are there any questions or discussions regarding the consent agenda? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the consent agenda is passed unanimously. The next item.
Sorry, may I interrupt? Can I make my motion before we get into it? Great. I would like to make a motion that we extend our meeting time by 30 minutes to complete board business this evening.
Is there a second?
I second.
All right, we have a motion, a second to extend the meeting by another 30 minutes so we can finish our board business. Are there any questions or discussion regarding that motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion carries and we have extended for another 30 minutes. The next agenda item is 7A, WASB resolutions for consideration. And so the good news is that DPI has already sent out a list of possible waivers and that we included in our COVID resolution. So I took waivers that weren't included in that DPI document and wrote them up as resolutions to be submitted to WASB for consideration. So those are attached. Is there any discussion? So one is the hold harmless district enrollment calculations for membership, as well as waiving standardized testing state report card requirements for the 2020-21 school year. Is there any discussion or a motion? Board Member Levy?
Thank you. I couldn't get to my question mark. The first is for clarification about the whole hold harmless district enrollment. Just so we're clear, so distance learning, virtual, even though a student is in Beloit virtual, they still count as our student, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I guess I'm missing the point about enrollment, how if we are still serving the students, why we would need an exemption to hold us harmless with district enrollment. And then my other question is about the waiving the standardized testing. I'm not in favor of this because if we're not doing standardized testing, my concern is that students that were already behind may fall further behind, and we won't have a way to track that, to document that. An example, one of our short-term board goals is to decrease the gap or increase improvement in reading. So if we don't have those state standards, is there an alternative measure where we can still stay on top of student progress, identify groups that have huge deficits, and make sure that we're accountable for bridging those gaps?
So in terms of the first part with the hold harmless, it's what the resolution's really asking for is that what our current enrollment was for last year should not be, our enrollment for this coming year should not be any lower than that. If our enrollment goes up, great, we have increased state funding. So the resolution is basically a way to say whatever the funding levels for districts were in 1920 should be for 2021. So that it might not apply to us, and it may apply to us. And that's kind of that unknown. The state testing, we do have MAPS testing. We've been doing that for a while, and MAPS testing does have a research-based link study that connects MAP scores to our forward testing, state testing. So we do have an internal metric that we could switch to that would provide us at least a benchmark by which we could measure that gap.
So just for clarification, if we waive or support the resolution to waive the standardized testing and state report card, are you saying that if we do that, we will still do MAP testing so we can keep a pulse on kind of student achievement and where our kids are?
Correct. By not doing, if the state testing was waived, we would still have an internal assessment process that we can look at to address those goals.
So, okay, last point. So is the reason for doing the state testing because it gives you like information with the national average that's outside of what our district is exclusively doing? Because if you're saying we're going to do MAPS no matter what, then what would ever be the reason to do the standardized testing?
The reason for the standardized testing is only for the federal. Well, it started off with No Child Left Behind, but now the ESSA requirements. So the only reason for the state testing is for the state report card and the ESSA federal guidance.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Board Member Jacobs.
Well, Dr. Kieser, you stole some of my thunder. I was just going to comment to Board Member Levy what Dr. Kieser said in regard to the MAP testing. Depending how much the kids are in school, we normally do it 3 times a year. And Dr. Kieser, correct me if I'm wrong, but we all, that also will, is correlated to MAP testing, or also correlates the reading to the state testing as well, correct?
Correct.
Not just math, yeah, that's what I thought. They're pretty strong indicators, Board Member Levy, of what we see on that MAP testing. And the teachers everywhere are probably groaning when they hear me say this, but I did like the MAP testing because it gave us a ton of data on how to help children individually in particular and across. It breaks it down into across all ethnicity, across all different lines, so we get very detailed information on cohorts of kids. And Dr. Kieser, are we also still doing the running records? Are you aware?
That I will have to follow up on. Going in distance, I will have to get back to you on that question.
Right, and that would, and that most likely would be if the kids come back to with the MAP testing. But yeah, I just wanted to reassure Board Member Levy that I do think that we really do have good internal things in place for us to help with that state standardized report card stuff. Thank you.
All right, Vice President Miller.
Thank you, President Larson. I just wanted to make a comment. One of the things I really appreciate about the resolution for the Hold Harmless is that since it's to the state, there are a lot of very underserved rural districts. And although I had to step into the CISA 2 meeting when we did get the school finance presentation, as you all heard, there's a lot of nuances to how schools are funded, and I think by making this resolution, it's going to protect funding for very already underserved and vulnerable districts that might be facing enrollment out because they're unable to provide adequately for the student needs that they have during COVID. So I just want to make a comment in support of that and explain why I think this is a good resolution to support. So thank you.
Are there any other questions or motion?
I move that we adopt the 2 resolutions to submit to WASB.
I second them.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to submit the 2 resolutions for Hold Harmless district enrollment calculations for membership and standardized testing and state report card requirements to WASB. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right. The resolutions will be submitted to WASB for consideration. Thank you. 7B, Joint State Education Convention in January. This year it's going to be January 20th through the 22nd in Milwaukee. They're planning as if it's going to be in person, but it's in January, and so who knows what will actually be happening. It seems like a little bit early to have this discussion, but as it gets closer, the rates do tend to go up. If anyone is interested, sometimes a motion could be to allow any board, the motion could say, I move to approve any board member who would like to attend the Joint State Educational Convention during 2021. Or it's also been, specific names. The first one, kind of making it more generic, is people do have to check calendars and availability, and then we just usually give a deadline to get in contact with the board secretary so she can make those arrangements. And of course, it's the prices listed are right now as if it would be in person, but it could change if they are virtual. Are there any questions? Board Member Jacobs.
Mr. President, can you refresh my memory? So are there 2 state conventions coming up? Because isn't Board Member Levy assigned?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So
that's a good question. That's a good question. So Board Member Levy's role is to represent us at the assembly, so where the resolutions will be formally adopted. So she's our delegate. So that's a part of the same convention. She just is going and serving a particular role. But a part of that convention is a lot of fantastic workshops, in breakout sessions. Board Member Wong went last year.
Yeah.
And
okay.
it's a joint because it's put on by 3 organizations, WSCA, WSB, and then the one for principals, which the business people. So it's really fantastic. It's a holistic view to our roles at the top of districts.
So are you asking at this time, just for clarification, Mr. President, anybody who might be interested in going at this time?
The recommended motion at this point would be yes, who is interested in going? And then the board would have to approve their attendance so that the board secretary could make those arrangements. Board Member Wong does have a question.
Okay, I was the delegate last year, and I did attend. It is it's 3 days off of your normal life, so you have to be plan ahead for that. But I would really like to see more people attend it this year, because me being one person, I could only go to a certain number of breakout sessions, and it would have been really neat to have another 1 or 2 people there to be able to collaborate together to find out what they learned compared to what I learned, and then we can bring that back, and hopefully. Dr. Kaiser hopefully will be involved in that as well. So there was a lot of people, and it's a great event. I would encourage everybody to go if they could have the opportunity.
Vice President Miller, I'm sorry, I didn't see you jump in.
You're fine. That actually worked out really well, because my comment was going to be that I think one of the highlights of my year last year was listening to Board Member Wong tell me how excited he was after the convention. And I was just going to say, touching back on your governance committee report about mentorship and making sure that we're providing good opportunities to grow a knowledgeable and involved and engaged board. Can I make a motion that what I'd like to do, and actually read the motion language this time, is that I move approval of any eligible board member attending the Joint State Education Convention in January 2021.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve any eligible board members attending the Joint State Education Convention in January 2021. Are there any questions or discussion? See none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
All right. The motion carries. Board Secretary, when do board members need to notify you of their intent?
The sooner the better, but if I could know by November 1st, that would be great.
All right, thank you very much. 7C is the interim superintendent goals and evaluation tool. Dr. Kieser?
So following up on our board workshop from last week with John Bales from WASDA, he mentioned 2 sample tools that I had looked at. And so I've, in the attachment in board docs, I've listed not only those 2 tools, but then in anticipation of this conversation, a draft of something for the board to react and comment and work from. So the 2 tools are, one, John Bales shared was a 2-pager, and that one is the one that is listed sample Board of Education evaluation of superintendent, and it goes fall 20 blank to fall 20 blank. This one I liked simply because, one, it was short. It did have those metrics that Dr. Bales had talked about and had a comment section. The shortcomings of this, based on his comments last week, are that it does not provide that high level of clarity that he referred to as far as evaluation. The second attachment, which has the narrative page up front and its title is Evaluation of Superintendent, does not have the metrics, so it doesn't have the numbering scheme to it, but it does have that clarity when when it speaks to, like, for instance, planning goals and says, works with the board to establish and prioritize goals for the district in areas of educational planning, fiscal planning, and facilities planning. That's that level of clarity that I believe Dr. Bales was referring to. And so as a draft, and I'll share this with, let's see here, if I can find it, there we go. Share with, on the screen here, is kind of a merge of the two. So where we have the metrics here, this could be, again, I left the numbers off because depending on how the board wanted to approach it as being a 3-2-1 or 1-2-3, so high being good or low being good, but then trying to put together some language for the board to react to that keeps it at that high level so that it is clear. These are the outcomes we're looking for, and the expectation is that hopefully the board sees it, and to what level does it see that. So I'll, at this point, kind of open it up for the board to react to in terms of feedback and direction.
Right. Does anyone, Board Member Levy?
So one, I'd just like to start by saying I really enjoyed Dr. Bales' presentation. I appreciate the way he kind of organized it with the organizational focus, the operational alignment, and then the institutional commitment. I am wondering what other board members think about, because this is so important. I don't want to rush it in at the end. We came up with some goals, and Dr. Keister and his team have committed to come back to us with those goals in SMART format, and then we can decide which ones we're going to move forward with. Could we, at that time, kind of flush out the evaluation tool? Because that way we would be clear about what goals we're going to be evaluating. And the reason I say that is because Dr. Bales pointed out that there's really not a good tool or a bad tool, but you have to customize it to make it what you need it to be. And I just feel like once we know what our short-term goals are, we'll be in a better position to customize an evaluation tool to make sure that we're being fair and also accountable.
Okay, Board Member Wong?
I'm fine with what Board Member Levy had mentioned. I mean, either way, I mean, I'd like the idea of getting this well ahead of time, because this is something that we haven't had ahead of time to be able to monitor. And I would find a way, or I'd like to try to find a way that we can kind of keep this front and center for all of us, so that every month or as the months go on, that we can continue to make note of things that come up throughout the year versus trying to come up with it all at the end.
Okay, Vice President Miller?
Thank you, President Larson. Question for Dr. Keister. If we take Board Member Levy's recommendation that we bring it back when you guys kind of figure out SMART goals and we customize it to that, what would be an ideal or optimal timeline for you so we can kind of address the very good concern I think that Board Member Wong just raised?
I like Board Member Levy's suggestion in terms of that operational alignment with the goals. And one of the conversations was from the short-term planning when those goals wanted to come back. I'm making a comment that I walked away from the short-term planning that bringing those SMART goals would be at the next the September business meeting. That's kind of my operational timeline, but I open that up for the board comment, and that would be a good time. I agree. Bringing those two things together, we'll just need to be very intentional, because those are two very deep conversations.
So then as a follow-up point then, I just want to summarize and make sure I'm clear on what I'm hearing. So what I'm hearing is the recommendation potentially would be to table this, to table action on this tonight, wait to hear the SMART goals that our administration is developing, and then at that same meeting, would it be at that same meeting where we would then adopt this? That would then be operationally aligned? Or would you recommend, like a buffer time? And if so, would that give us enough time to have the tool kind of adopted?
I would say that the conversations could happen one after the other. So after having the conversation about the goals and which goals moving forward, that could lead directly into the conversation around this. It'll also give the board time to take a look at this draft, as well as the 2 samples that I pulled from, to make recommendations at that time as to additions, language changes, inclusion of the goals, and so forth.
Thank you.
Board Member Levy?
Okay, so I want to amend my recommendation. As I'm thinking about the work that's going to need to go into this, we may want to have this as a separate workshop instead of finding ourselves at almost 10 o'clock at the end of the board meeting on September 29th, because I do want to give this kind of like the time that it needs to be done well.
Okay, so kind of going along with that then, so I'm thinking, would you want, so it almost seems to make sense then that a workshop would be finalizing those SMART goals, like adopting those because they work hand in hand. So that workshop would be finalizing those SMART goals as well as adopting the evaluation tool. And I think that in the meantime, and Dr. Keyser, oh my gosh, Dr. Keyser, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can provide, board members can provide feedback about, do you prefer like a number system versus this, this exceptional meets, needs improvement, and kind of like the formatting, which aren't about the goals themselves, but like the specificity and pieces of it.
Just so that I heard what you were saying to me correctly, that in the intervening time, the board could send me feedback directly about this tool so that I can incorporate that feedback when we bring it back after the short-term planning goal finalization, correct?
Yeah, and maybe now that you said it back to me, maybe that's not a great idea. I would like to have this discussion not via email as possible, but think about what you like, I guess, and then be prepared to discuss at the workshop, I guess. So
Yeah.
really study this and be prepared with comments and pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
And not only this draft, but then the 2 other recommendations say, I really like this on this one, but it's not incorporating the draft, or let's try to bring that. So,
yes.
Okay, so we will work on scheduling a workshop then for September. No, we don't have, I don't think we need a motion because, yeah, I think that's where we are. Okay, so we will work on scheduling a workshop for September. Thank you. Is there anything else, Dr. Keyser?
No, thank you.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the motion from July 28 business meeting, and I'm going to turn over to Dr. Keyser.
Okay, so the conversation tabled and moved forward to today, and I will stop sharing my screen because that will be, don't want to lose that. The conversation that was tabled from our last meeting to here, from the 11th to now, was a conversation that came as a result of the July 28th vote on the model. And the reason, again, bringing this back was to operationally get clarity on what the vote was intended and the conversation that was had. Just to summarize, it was between the 11th and now, the the recommendation was for us to review the video in terms of from the motion to the motion, and I will watch it from the motion to all the way till the end, and get some operational clarity in terms of what the motion was and what the expectation walking away from that was. And the reason for bringing it back was my feeling that in informal conversations with board members that people walked away from that decision, from that vote, with different operational goals. So I will leave that summary there and open it up for comments and continuation of the conversation.
Board Member Levy?
Okay, so a few things, and I will try to be brief. One, I am concerned that the motion that I made on the 28th and the motion I was told I was made on the 28th at our August 11th meeting were very different. So I would just like to say that whoever is making a motion as it's recorded, I strongly believe it should be the words that came out of that person's mouth and not any additional notes or et cetera added into that. And I'm further confused because the minutes that we are scheduled to approve today from the July 28th meeting says that they were generated on August 3rd. So I don't know where the information that I was told I said on the 28th, on the 11th, came from, if those notes were generated on the 3rd. And as it's stated in the notes, it's actually what I said. I forgive anyone who was confused by that. If you have questions, I can answer them at the end. But my other point was, I really firmly believe that the board should determine the what, and our interim superintendent and his team should determine the how. I think reopening is a what question, but I would just like to point out a couple of things. When we, earlier on the meeting on the 28th, we were presented information by Mr. Beard and Dr. Kieser about postponing the fall season. And I bring that up because it's related. Just stick with me. They presented the information from WIAA, the health department, because they are the closest to it. They have the most relevant information. They laid out 4 options and they provided a recommendation, and the board made the decision. When the board made the decision, no one was accused of micromanaging or trying to undermine anyone. So I don't understand why the process would be different when it came to should we meet face-to-face, which again, I think is a what. The reason I feel that way is that since we're elected by the community and accountable to them, we have the benefit of 7 individuals that have their pulse on the community and can come together to bring that decision, so you have that community input. I am concerned if we as a board decide that this is our interim superintendent's decision. I always like to think forward and reason back. If Dr. Kieser is solely responsible for making this decision, which I don't agree with, but I yield to the will of the board, whatever that may be, if this goes horribly wrong, we could be putting him on an island unto himself to deal with the burden of that decision. And I don't think that's a good partnership. I don't think that that is a fair place to put our interim superintendent in. So again, I think it's the responsibility of the board to determine the what, which I think this decision is, and then the interim superintendent and his team to determine the how. And I would like if someone could provide some clarity around why the process was fine for deciding about the sports season, but the process is somehow felt to be different when we talk about schools reopening.
Thank you, Board Member Levy, for your comments, and I would like to provide a little bit of context in terms of the process, and then perhaps bring some of my thinking as to why I felt the decision for sports and clubs was different than the 28th with the model, because I believe that from that the 28th decision. It definitely helped inform the approach and the information provided for the sports. Operationally, so technically, the logistics of the motion. So the motion, similarly to the state convention, was preloaded in there, and that was from that. And so when the motion around the model, because of the conversations that were happening, it was when your motion said we would adopt the model, instead of wiping out all of that, because that was the motion in the model, that's how that extra language got in there. Moving forward, the direction that I've given in consultation with Board President Larson was that we will still continue to pre-populate motions in our agendas, and if a board member says so moved, then it carries forward. If there's discussion or if there's a new motion, that agreement that the motion should be recorded as it's recorded on in this case, digitally. So that moving forward will occur. The context of the WIA decision, because of walking away and having this discussion, working with Joel Beard for the presentation, he and I met and said we have to be extremely clear as to what is the expectation and the ask, so that we are absolutely clear that when the conversation gets to a point where the board is adopting either our recommendation or one of the other recommendations, that we clarify and in cases ask to read back what the motion is so that we avoid the confusion. I felt that this as a result, and in going back, the motion between the motion and the vote, there was about 15 minutes of discussion. And in that time, I counted at least twice that I know that Board Member Levy clarified the motion that she was making, and yet there was at least 2 or 3 times that other board members had summarized that, and the summary and the original motion and the clarifications did not align. And that's where I think the confusion came from. Learning forward from that, for the sports meeting, Mr. Beard and myself wanted to make sure that we presented very clear direction as to what the motion was. And in this case, because one of the 3 districts dropped out, it was, if one drops out, we're all dropping out. And that's why I felt it was a much cleaner and clearer process as opposed to the 28th, because it was the first time we were making such a heavy decision.
Okay, Board Member Jacobs.
Sorry, I couldn't find that little mute button again. Okay, so can somebody help me out with remembering? I know I think I was misunderstanding some of this. I understand what you just said, Superintendent Keitzer, but wasn't there, we had discussion about a policy that is in place now, correct? That talked about what to do in the case of, was that an emergency opening or closing? And anybody, please feel free to pop in, because I'm not remembering.
I'm going to pop in actually and ask for a time extension if we could. So I move that we extend our board meeting by 30 minutes to allow us to conclude the business of this meeting.
Is there a second?
I second.
All right, we have a motion extent and a second for another 30-minute extension. Are there any questions or discussion regarding this motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries and we extended for another 30 minutes.
And I don't wish to prolong this or anything. I just want us to work it out, and so we're all on the same page, because I'm not sure that I'm confused by that policy that was brought up. And Dr. Kieser, I believe, if I remember correctly, you had just gone to a seminar or whatever, and am I correct in my recollection that it said that the when there's not a policy, then the superintendent makes that decision?
Correct,
Please
Board
jump in.
Member. Correct, Board Member Jacobs. Actually, yes, in my Superintendent's Academy conversation, we talked a lot about policies and the board superintendent relationship. After our conversation, it was brought to my attention that we do have a policy in addition to the ones that we talked about last time. Policy 151.4, administration in policy absence, which does speak to the essence of what I shared. Our policy says in cases where actions must be taken within the school system where the Board of Education has provided no guides or administrative actions, the superintendent of schools shall have the power to act. It also goes on to say that those decisions can be reviewed by the board at its regular meeting and in including the recommendation of additional policies. To the conversation at hand, Board Member Levy shared her position in terms of why she made the motion she did, and precisely for that reason, the fact that in my informal conversations with other board members, that wasn't a consensus. I wanted to bring this back so that the board, as an entity, would provide me some clarity as to the intent of that vote, so that moving forward, I don't make a decision that isn't in alignment with the will of the board. That is the reason for bringing this conversation and why I feel it was important. Doing that now as opposed to in October, which is October 5th is the midway point of first quarter. We want to have this ironed out well before that.
Yes, and I appreciate you bringing it back up for discussion. I'm interested in hearing from all of our colleagues and coming up with some kind of resolution to this. And I just want to make the comment that I know we all have made, and this is just a really frustrating time for everyone. There's really no right or wrong answers, and we're all just trying our best to feel our way through it and to do what's right for kids. And I really, truly believe that every board member wants what's best for our kids.
All right, thank you. Vice President Miller.
Thank you, President Larson. Okay, so the two things that I pulled away from what Board Member Levy and what Dr. Kieser shared were, I feel like with the policy discussion, I'm going to ask if it's okay for us to deal with any policy clarifications in policy committee. I appreciate what you said about learning forward, and I think the most appropriate use of our time and the most constructive way to kind of get into the weeds on that would be just to refer that to a policy committee meeting. So that's kind of one piece of what I'd like to share. What I really appreciated about what Board Member Levy said was about clarifying the what. And it sounds to me like we as a board have to come to consensus. Is the what that we are reopening, and the how is up to Dr. Kieser and his team? Or when we approved the opening plan, did we already approve the what? And then he's got the flexibility within there. And I think I think like what Board Member Jacobs just said, I think it can go either way. So I think maybe the best use of our time right now is like, let's kind of feel out what is the what is the how, and then we can kind of clarify from there.
Thank you. Board Member Levy.
I think what might be helpful, because as I'm listening to everyone, it was a unanimous vote, but I kind of get the feeling that everyone was not clear on what they were voting for. And then I think that would link back to the policy that Dr. Kieser referred to, the 151.4, because it clearly says in cases where action must be taken within the school system, where the Board of Education has provided no guide. Because I think that my intent for the motion was the guide. But if we decide as a board, like, yeah, I agreed to that, but I was unclear on what I agreed to, then I think the next move would be to rescind the motion and then be very clear on what we are agreeing to. And then I also agree that if the motion does not provide that guidance that's referenced in policy 151.4, then that should absolutely be handled in policy and personnel. And the final point that I'll bring up is we currently don't have policy that addresses reopening. We do have policy that addresses emergency closure in a pandemic, and that's separate from inclement weather, and I don't want to conflate the two. So we do have pandemic policy around emergency closures. I think since this is on our radar now, the responsible thing to do would be to provide some guidance through policy about what reopening looks like. And then we can handle the separate decision of whose call is it to make. But we have until October, November. I really want to get this right because I want us to be consistent moving forward.
Vice President Miller.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you, because that really helped me clarify kind of my thinking on this too. I mean, what does the group think about if we just deal with this strictly in policy first, come up with and have this discussion that I think we just kind of sort of started to have now. Let's bump it into a policy committee meeting, kind of get into the weeds and hash through the lanes, the what and the how, come up with very specific and clear language. And then if we could do that in the September meeting, that should give us plenty of time to get that passed well before October 5th. And I also want to be sensitive to the time tonight, but I also don't want us to not do it just because of the time right now. You see what I'm saying? So, I mean, could we reach a consensus about if it would be most appropriate to deal with this and let this be policy driven? Because that feels a little more stable and more thorough to me. I think it was a good recommendation.
Go ahead, Dr. Kieser.
Vice President Miller, just so I understand, are you thinking, is the thought that we would go into policy committee to create a policy around opening of schools?
I feel like we're having kind of two conversations. One is to clarify the motion, which thank you for giving us the opportunity to have this discussion. So that's kind of one part. Another part is kind of clarifying the extent to which we have policy that supports that motion. And it sounds to me like we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit. I mean, what we do should be policy driven. And since there's not currently a reopening and a pandemic policy like explicitly, maybe the way to kind of handle all of this is we just create that policy. We can have this discussion about the extent to which it's appropriate for administrators to make the call and where, if anywhere, the board steps in at all. And we could just like have that discussion in a policy committee meeting, generate a pandemic opening policy, which is, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Board Member Levy, but it sounds to me like that's something that was just brought up that we don't currently have. So rather than hash through this motion language right now, I feel like let's put it back in order. What we should do should be policy driven. So let's just handle it in policy.
Thank you for that clarification.
Oh, thanks for asking.
Board Member Levy.
I completely agree. And my question was going to be, do we need to clean up the motion? But if we don't have anything to move on as our next step, I agree we should do this in policy. Is it an inappropriate request to ask that all board members come to that policy meeting so we can hash it out together and not 3 of us hash it out and then we have to hash it out again?
I mean, any board member is welcome to attend any meeting. The board can't require attendance of board members at things. You know, it's just like people can't require us to be all here in person. You know what I mean? So as long as we can let the board know that policy will be discussed at that policy and personnel committee meeting, and then any interested board members are welcome to attend. And I can talk to Board Member Jacobs as that gets closer about the roles of board members who aren't staying on that committee as it gets closer. Did that answer your question, Board Member Levy?
Yeah, it does. Fair.
Okay.
Yep, that's fair.
Perfect. Thank you. Board Member. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Keyser.
And maybe I'm stepping ahead here. Would it be a benefit for me to reach out to our board attorney to perhaps draft something for policy on the 8th to have the committee and any other board members react to?
I think that would be the appropriate timeline, because if I'm thinking we would need it to pass committee, have it come to committee on the 8th. So then if it needed any other revisions for that 29th meeting, right? So that, because you would need that policy passed in order to give you guidance for October 5th to make the decision. So
we would have to waive policy B. Because if we're bringing it to the 8th, then the 29th,
right,
and then the end of October, so we missed the date.
Right.
That was my question, is that we're pushing this down the road, and the quarter's going to end, and we're not going to have any ability to be able to make a decision because of this. So I think we have to be very conscious of that, because if we are trending down in the metrics that Dr. Keyser brought up in the initial meeting on the 28th, if we're looking like, wow, we should be opening up, but we can't make that decision because we don't have policy in place, unless we're going to waive policy on that. So we have to be conscious of that. And I know that for some, that's a big concern about waiving policy. And I want to be respectful of that.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Jacobs?
So I'm a bit confused about the October 5th date. When is the actual end of first quarter? November, correct?
Actually Halloween, October 31st is the last day of the first quarter.
October 30th, Halloween. Okay, so, okay. I mean, I'm very open to taking it to policy and encouraging as many board members to attend that as possible. I am also listening to what Board Member Wong said about being sensitive to people who, on the board who feel waiving might not be the right thing. At this point, I don't have a clear-cut answer for everyone. I just want us to work through this together, and I will go with the good of the board, so the majority of the board. So I'm not really quite sure how we proceed.
Okay, Vice President Miller?
So in the spirit of what Board Member Jacobs just said and finding consensus, is there, could we just kind of feel out, is there consensus on being willing to, because I agree, we need to be sensitive to the concerns that Board Member Wong just raised. We need to get this done quickly enough that we have time to make good decisions, which is the spirit of why we're having this conversation, right? So can we find consensus now where we kind of agree that we're good on waiving policy about expediting the process of creating the pandemic reopening policy so that we can move forward in a way that gives us like the space and the time to make good decisions and have the time really to kind of get our elbows into it, get us set up, because we've never had a pandemic before, so we do need to kind of fast track some policy, and then going forward we're good. I mean, is there consensus there? Like, because I'm fine with that.
That's one way to do it. Another way to approach it is to say, we can give, say, Dr. Keyser, this is what we would like you to do, and we can build the policy from that aligns with this decision. So they don't necessarily have to contradict each other. So you can. It's not always necessarily putting the cart before the horse. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I believe that there are exceptions where it's okay to waive policy. This time, I would be a little bit more hesitant about it, especially with it being so close, because we'd really have to waive a first reading, and that makes me, nervous. And if that's something we're expecting administration to use going, just a couple weeks after, I think we really need to make sure that it's correct. And I don't necessarily know how many boards have policies regarding like a reopening, because I think most boards have the assumption that if the superintendent closes the schools, then they also reopen them. So it may take some time with Dr. Keyser to work with Rob and the attorneys to draft a policy based on current policies and create something new. Board Member Wong.
Yeah, we have to be very careful with this. This is unfair to anybody in our community, our district, our students, our staff members, administration, the whole 9 yards. I mean, I think that we all felt we had a plan coming into this, and now we're suddenly derailed. And I get it. And I want to be respectful of everybody that's been involved in this, but we definitely need to have the plan, and we can't have this, done and by the end of October and say, okay, quarter's opening on November on, the next day. That's unfair whatsoever to anybody involved.
Vice President Miller.
Just to clarify, Board Member Wong, I don't think anybody is suggesting that we wait until that late, but I do want to go back to what President Larson said there, and I think that I would be in favor of asking, if there is time, and I'm going to ask Dr. Keyser if this works for him, if Dr. Keyser wanted to work with our attorney and his team to kind of bring some proposed language forward, so that rather than us hash through it and then drop something on administration that they need to kind of then figure out, if it's admin driven, and then we can all kind of like have the discussion, you know what I mean, and kind of go through it, and then everybody leaves in a good place, we pass it in a quick enough time, then it's not just dropping it on admin, it's come from admin, you see what I'm saying? And then we can implement it, I would expect by that October 5th date. Since it's today is August 25th, right? So we've got some wiggle room. I guess my question really is for Dr. Keyser. What makes the most sense for you and for your team being conscientious? I mean, you know better than we do what your needs are. So what do you think?
Well, I certainly can reach out to Rob and get him working on draft language. No, and it would be draft language around, and this would be the piece that I would need tonight to give direction to him, would be policy language around reopening of schools during a national health crisis, to include pandemics, if that's where people are at. And then, yes, then on the 8th, giving him a timeline of that, we could bring something back on September 8th. Then it would be incumbent upon the board suspending policy and all that. So, but yes, I could work under that timeline.
Thank you.
Board Member Levy.
So it's late. That's my disclaimer. But let's walk through this briefly. Would it be helpful to come to consensus tonight amongst board members if the board feels that this should be a board decision or if this should be an administrative decision? Because once I think we figure that out, that might shape how we move forward and streamline some of this work.
I think that that's very helpful, and I think that, if the board comes to consensus with that tonight, then I think it gives really Dr. Keyser, a big, huge piece of the information he needs for he and his team to start planning for what happens after the end of the first quarter. So, I can start off and say, my thought is that it is an administrative decision, and that using those criteria that Dr. Keyser provided in the presentation, that he should make that decision whether it's going to be a face-to-face or distance learning model. Yeah, Vice President Miller, do you want to go next? And I'll just go through everyone and allow everybody to give their thoughts.
Sure. I would mostly agree with that. I feel like that's in the how lane in terms of how we reopen. The only caveat is I would just like to say that since that criteria was developed in July, and it made a ton of sense in July, I would just ask that if there's like a significant change in circumstances, that the board be allowed to revisit that criteria, because I feel like that does kind of fall into the what category. So I would say, given there isn't a significant change in how COVID is working in the community, I'm fine with that. I just think that if there is a significant change, that we be allowed to ask for that to be an agenda item so that we could just revisit the criteria. But does that make sense? Yeah? Okay.
Okay. All right. Board Member Anderson?
I do feel that it is a admin decision. We provided the guidance, and as Megan pointed out, or Board Member Miller pointed out, that if there is some kind of criteria that has changed, that it just gets brought back up to us so that we can help shape that guidance again.
All right. Board Member Wong?
I would agree with the last two comments.
Board Member Levy?
So I think that this is a board decision, and if my other three colleagues could provide some clarification, because I am concerned. I think it's either the board's decision or it's Dr. Keyser's decision. I don't want to say it's Dr. Keyser's decision unless something changes, because then it feels like we're giving you this authority unless we don't agree with what you're doing, and then we'll take it back. And I definitely don't think that that should be an option. I think it's either the board's decision or Dr. Keyser's, and we need to leave it alone. And then my vote, if my informal vote, is that I think this should be a board decision.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Jacobs?
Wow, I'm kind of conflicted. I'm leaning toward it being administration, yet what Board Member Levy said about if things go south or sour, then Dr. Keyser is kind of left hanging. And I don't know if that's an appropriate way to look at it or not. That's how I'm feeling. I am conflicted, though I am leaning toward the administration. It's just, this is hard for all of us. I know. I'll just speak for myself. It's really difficult for me because we've never been in this type of situation, and I don't want to. I don't know. It's just easier for 7 rather than 1 to take flack, for lack of a better word that I can think of this late in the evening. I do tend to think, though, it is more of the how than the what. That's where I'm at.
Okay, that was as clear as mud.
Well, and I thank you for being so honest with me, Mr. President. I'm doing my best. Okay, so I'm leaning to, all right. Do you want a definitive answer, Mr. President?
Absolutely.
Well, all right then, sir. I will say it should be Dr. Keyser's call.
Thank you, Board Member Jacobs. Board Member Delgado?
going to agree with the majority. I think this should be Dr. Kesis Cole. And I'm just going to say something. Whatever his decision is, it has to be backed up by the board. He will not be left alone to, on that decision. If we're giving him the trust, to make that judgment call, we will stand behind him as a board.
Thank you. Vice President Miller. I'm sorry,
go
Board
ahead.
Member Levy, that was an old question mark, right? I didn't skip you.
It's old. Thank
Okay,
you for
thank
checking.
you. Thank you. Vice President Miller.
Sorry, now I feel like I'm interrupting. I actually just have a question for Dr. Kieser. So I was kind of brainstorming as I listened to everybody else's answers. And Board Member Jacobs, I appreciate you sharing your thinking with us because that helped me form my thinking. So I started thinking, like, to what extent, because what we're kind of playing around with is asking you to bring us policy language so that we can be a policy-driven, decision-making board that is also responsive to kind of what we feel is the best way to move forward right now, right? So I'm curious, in that policy, the extent to which you see us working as like an 8-person team. Like, is it something where you would want, and you say no and it's fine, but is there something where you would want guidance from the board and any part of that decision-making, be it like the criteria, and if it's a flat no, then it's a flat no. And I think that would help. So like when Board Member Delgado says like, we want to be unanimous and stand behind you. And do you see, I guess like, sorry, and I'm searching for my question here, so I apologize. And I know we need a motion to extend time too, so my bad. But do you see room, like, do you feel supported if it's solely your decision? And is there room in policy for there to be like either a confirmation from the board in your imagination? Like, what do you see? Because the concern that's brought up is support for you. So I'm kind of just curious on your perspective on that.
I do feel that it is a how question and so falls into my decision. That being said, I would be remiss to say that the decision would not be informed by bringing information to the board and seeking, the feedback from the board as I bring updated numbers through my board superintendent updates and so forth. So yes, a decision by me, but also being informed by the conversations between now and the decision-making time by bringing information to the board and asking for the board's comments and thoughts.
So then just to clarify, we could expect that prior to October 5th that there would be some update from you where we would have a chance to kind of have that discussion. If there were any concerns, that would help inform your decision making, and then you would bring us a decision by October 5th. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
All right, so does everybody have a clear direction of where this is going? Okay. If it was consensus, I don't think we have consensus. Okay. Board Member Levy?
So would it be helpful to have a formal vote?
I think.
So we're parallel working on policy, but the decision is made. It sounds like the board is going to defer to Dr. Kieser for this decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having a formal vote on that will give Dr. Kieser the space he needs to move forward with policy and bringing that back to us.
Sure.
And as he formulates his decision for October 5th.
Okay. Is there anyone willing to make such a motion?
Just point, I think the proper direction would be to rescind the previous vote and then make the new vote. I could be wrong.
Okay. So I'm kind of wondering because
May I jump in?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so here's the thing. My intention behind the motion was for the board to make the decision, but it was not explicitly stated. So I think the two things can coexist because we're not changing the model, we're not changing distance/virtual learning for the first term. So I think the two can live together
Yeah, they wouldn't contradict each other, because I think if we were to say, no, we're, for example, no, we're going to go back face-to-face September 8th, then that's in clear contradiction of that motion, and so then I think we would need to rescind. So I think just this is almost like a clarifying parallel motion, so I think that we're okay not rescinding it.
Thank you for that clarification, Board Member Levy. That helps.
Okay, I'm going to take a stab at this, but the first motion I'd like to make is that we extend our time by hopefully not 30, but up to 30 minutes to finish our board business for this evening.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to extend our board meeting by 30 minutes, but we're not going to use all of them. Any questions or discussion regarding that motion? See none. All in
I
favor,
have a
please?
question. Who seconded?
I did, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Board Member Jacobs.
All right.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions or discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
And now, Vice President Miller would like to make another motion.
So as my motions tend to go, this will probably be more of a rough draft, but I I move that we ask Dr. Kieser to bring forth a policy that articulates his autonomy in reopening during a national health crisis inclusive of a pandemic.
Can I offer a
Yes.
friendly amendment?
Please.
So that the piece that's missing would be, in the meantime,
So,
he can,
right, so,
Okay.
right, we don't finish what you were saying, because same
so,
page.
so that in the meantime, he is able to plan to make that decision.
Yes, so that in the meantime, he can continue to make plans for how to responsibly continue education for second quarter. Right, because we're planning, yes?
I think.
I lost words, sorry.
I'm sorry.
I would like to specifically say the reopening
Yes.
decision.
Yeah,
I
thank
think
you.
We need to be clear
Thank
on.
you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the way Michelle's looking at me, I know this isn't going well. This is a clearly rough draft. So Vice President Miller, can you please read the first part of your motion?
Okay, so I'm going to write this down. So I would like to move that we give Dr. Kieser help me out here, jump in, but I would like to move that we.
Authority?
Thank you. I would like to move that we give Dr. Kieser the authority to reopen schools per our approved reopening plan, right? So that's not going to mess with that. Okay, so I would like to move that we give Dr. Kieser the authority to reopen schools per our approved reopening plan, right? And what's that? At term, yeah, right, at quarter.
Decisions are made at
Right,
term, yeah.
because, to in line with the previous motion. And for him to bring back a recommended policy, right, reopening policy to be considered by the board. Does that work?
I think that captures all of the essential pieces and ties up loose ends. Michelle, when you're ready, can you read that back, please? Sorry, Board Secretary.
This is what I have. Move to give Dr. Kieser the authority to reopen schools per the approved reopening plan at quarter, and for him to bring back a recommended reopening policy to be considered by the board.
Works for me, work for everybody else?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to that Dr. Kieser has the authority to make the decision on how, whether to reopen schools for that second quarter per the approved plan, but in the meantime, drafting a policy regarding reopening of schools during a pandemic. Okay?
Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Absolutely. Are there any other questions or discussion? Board Member Wong?
Just so I'm clear on this, the policy is meant to provide autonomy by administration with approval of the board. Is that the direction? Okay.
I don't think it's approval of the board. It's either it's our decision or it's their decision. And I don't think we should get into a space where it's your decision until I don't agree with it and then I want to override you.
So I think, my interpretation of the policy is that it gives the superintendent the authority to do that without board approval. But the board is kind of approving it because with the creation of a policy, we're kind of approving that, and with this motion. Was that as clear as mud?
Well, no, we're getting there because here's the thing. We are approving something without seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine if
Right.
everybody's on the same page. But what I don't think is fair to Dr. Kieser is if we say tonight, this is your decision,
Mhm.
but then 6 months from now, if he makes a decision that makes us squeamish, then we try to
Right.
pull it back in. Like it's our decision or it's his decision. I don't think we should do the back and forth.
Okay. All right. Vice President Miller?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so it's his decision, but he still has the right to request guidance from the board, correct?
That's not
I mean,
what I'm
that's-
saying. Of course, he can request input, but I'm saying if we get squeamish about the decision, we shouldn't come in and try to override him. Like it's clearly it's our decision or it's his decision.
Mm-hmm.
And when we write policy, it will be stated as such, correct?
Yeah, well, we can talk about, the policy when the policy comes. I think Dr. Kieser has the guidance of the board as to what the board would like to see in that policy. Go ahead.
Yes, I would bring a draft, and then at policy committee, that conversation, that would be the exact conversation that would be had at that time.
Okay, very good. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any other questions or discussion regarding that motion? Okay, Board Secretary, can you please read the motion back once more?
Miller moved to give Dr. Kieser the authority to reopen schools per the approved reopening plan at quarter, and for him to bring back a recommended reopening policy to be considered by the board. It was seconded by Wong.
Okay, any other questions or discussion?
I just want to clarify because I really appreciate where Board Member Levy is coming from because you're like, that was when we first went around and kind of read back our consensus thing. I think I was the one who introduced this, like, well, we want to have some kind of like a safeguard because like things could change, you know what I mean? So I feel confident that we could work through a lot of that, the nuance of that and the details of that in policy. So that's, I don't know, I guess I feel like that's why personally I feel that that's addressed. I think that there's room in a policy to put in language like with guidance pertaining to, whatever considerations. But I see that you're not sure about that, which is fair. And I think you're right. We need to do this right. So I want to make sure everybody feels comfortable with that and make sure I'm not in like a delusional utopian space here either. So weigh in.
I think that, if it sounds to me like your concern is kind of like around the policy or what the policy will say. And I think right now we have to put that aside and deal with that when the policy is in draft in front of us. And right now the motion is to allow Dr. Kieser to make that decision at term. And in the meantime, bring forth the draft of a policy. Any other questions or discussion? All right, seeing none, roll call please, Michelle. Board Secretary.
Wong,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Levy,
Nay.
Larson,
Aye.
Jacobs,
Aye.
Delgado,
Aye.
Anderson.
Aye.
Motion carried 6-1.
All right, thank you. Brings us now to the business meeting minutes from July 28th.
There's, I was just looking, and I apologize for not bringing this up earlier, but I didn't get a chance to look at them until this morning. I noticed that in item 3, it's missing I know we had a number of comments that night. Is it supposed to include who commented? Because it just says like read comments from. I'm just seeking clarification on that. So the only other piece there is on item 7A. It looks like there's also some missing information there. It's like Juan clarified that the resolution is basically asked the state and federal government for leniency in the school year and. So I'm just wondering if we could approve them pending that we complete just those, it's item 3 and item 7A.
Yep, yeah, we can do that. Is that your motion?
Certainly.
So your motion is to approve them with the addition of the comments from that night, and then the addition of the missing portion of 7A.
That is correct.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from July 28th. I'm sorry. I was afraid I'm going to miss somebody commenting as I'm looking at the minutes and going back and forth between Board Docs and Google Meet. So with the adding that portion of 7A that was cut off and is missing, as well as adding the comments in section 3. Any other questions or discussion regarding the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. Brings us to future meeting dates. Let's see. Hang on, I have them all here. They are listed on Board Docs if I missed something or if you want to come back to them if you're still awake at home. Planning and Budget Committee will meet Tuesday, September 1st at 5:15 p.m. Oversight and Finance will meet Tuesday, September 8th, the time that will be determined. Policy and Personnel will also meet Tuesday, September 8th, the time to be determined. A Special Policy and Personnel Committee meeting on Tuesday, September 22nd, time to be determined. And our Board Business meeting will be Tuesday, September 22nd, at 7 p.m. And there will also be a workshop for the short-term goals as well as Dr. Keyser's evaluation tool that will be scheduled for some time in September. All right, board members, this brings us to adjournment. If we've completed all of the business on the agenda, may I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Board Member Levy moved, Board Member Wong seconded. Any other questions or discussion regarding adjournment? Seeing none, all in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.